This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think you've heard me say this quite a few times. Since about 2015, certainly since 2016, middle of 2016, people sometimes say, how do you manage when the news is so difficult or so grim? And of course, I mean, some of the news that I find grim, you might have found absolutely delightful. And I've had this phrase bandying around now for quite some time. I say it's good for business, but bad for the soul. And what I mean by that is that if, like me, you really enjoy talking about stuff that is going on around us, current affairs, as you might call them, then the more that is going on around us, the more engaged you are, the more there is to get your teeth into. But of course, if it's stuff that outside of your work milieu actually disappoints you or saddens you or upsets you or infuriates you, it's a really weird tension. I had the pleasure of sitting down yesterday for a while with Christiane Amanpour, the sort of doyenne of war correspondents, who's launching a new podcast, a very exciting podcast with her ex-husband Jamie Rubin on Global, in fact, in this very stable. And I was just struck watching her talk. She's one of those people that can hold your attention indefinitely, in fact. And with very little input from me. It's a forthcoming episode of Full Disclosure, but you won't hear much from me in it because I was so interested in what she had to say and because she had so much to say. And I was really struck listening to her by that tension. Again, I don't often think of it in other people's lives. I'm too busy thinking about it in mine. Good for business, but bad for the soul. Whether, you're working for an American broadcaster and you're talking about what Donald Trump is trying to do at the moment, to the media, to the judiciary, to academia, all of those things are absolutely fascinating. There are periods in our lives where we don't really think there's much for the historians to notice. Do you know what I mean? The historians of the future are not going to have a great deal to say about, 2002 to 2006. You're going to message me now and remind me of something absolutely epic that happened. There is a reason why that old Chinese proverb about wishing that you live in interesting times is actually a curse. I think we're all a little bit happier if we don't live in interesting times, unless you do what we do, unless you actually enjoy talking about current affairs. So Keir Starmer's speech, the beginning of this week on Monday, is at the moment one of the finest examples I can think of in recent years of something that is good for business, as in the time that we spend together, the meat, the territory, the nutrition that we like to get our teeth into, but bad for the soul, as in it's a mark of something happening in the country that I would rather was not happening. It's a sign of something unfolding that I would rather was not unfolding. I hope you know where I'm going with this. So it's why there's a sort of curious dichotomy inside me when I turn up in the studio this morning knowing that I want to talk about a story that hasn't garnered a great deal of attention, but which is inextricably linked to the speech that Keir Starmer gave on Monday, and crucially to the fallout, the backlash, the unhappiness, not so much about the detail of the white paper, but very much about the choice of words, the specific choice of words that Starmer himself deployed during the speech. And I think most pertinently, the ones that we picked up on yesterday with Sir Sadiq Khan, the words like island of strangers, and for me, squalid. The squalid chapter. For me, it was the use of the word squalid that I found really unpleasant and profoundly unnecessary. It's not, for the record, and indeed, as I explained yesterday, and now you're sending me all the important stuff that happened in the period that I just described, and you're absolutely right, I'm an idiot. So let's accept that. Let's establish there, beyond any reasonable doubt, I don't know, 1970, there's the Falklands. All right, there hasn't been a little period of time for a while in which nothing of importance happened. The Afghan and the Iraq wars, of course, that Putin now uses to justify Ukraine. Scratch that. Come up with your own era when the historians of the future won't have much to write about. because they've got a lot to write about now, and we've got a lot to talk about. And it's time to turn the attention to the people that Keir Starmer was talking about on Monday. We have worried at the knot of who he was talking to. We found out quite a lot yesterday. I don't know if you saw the polling that showed widespread support both for the tone and the language of that speech, both the content and the tone of that speech, YouGov polling. I suspect it's at its lowest among certain types of Labour voters. Well, me, I suppose. That the approval will be at the lowest among precisely the sort of people who somewhat idealistically, for want of a better word, think that Labour is their party or that Keir Starmer is their man. He made it pretty clear on Monday that he isn't. Alec yesterday was a caller, I thought, of great insight and courage. But all of our callers kind of pinned down something that Daniel Finkelstein writes about very powerfully in the Times today. And it's a form of tribalism. And it's a sense that people who aren't in your tribe are getting something that they don't deserve, and that people in your tribe are therefore being denied something that they do deserve. It's often not true. It's hardly ever true. But the politicians most effective at feeding that feeling are, the sort of Donald Trumps and Nigel Farages of this world. And it is an incredibly effective tactic. And the worse people feel their life is going, that the less they feel they're getting, instead of turning towards the people getting the most, they turn towards the people getting what they think should be rightfully theirs. And this isn't even a criticism. I mean, Finkelstein's piece brings vampire bats into it. I don't want to commit any spoilers, but it's a wonderful piece of writing, and it speaks directly to that queue that I talked about on Monday, the very widespread sense that you have queued up politely, Britishly, if you prefer. Because no one queues like a Brit. You have queued up and people are pushing in front of you. And that is the feeling, I think, that Keir Starmer was talking to. I really do. I think he has very deliberately targeted an emotion that I think is largely bogus, but also real. In other words, people really, really feel it, but the facts don't support the feeling, as is so often the case. I always think back to that caller many, many moons ago on this programme who said famously, "You can prove anything with facts, James," as if that was an insult. And I didn't register at the time what a profound moment that was in my education of how public opinion works. You can prove anything with facts. James, we had a caller earlier this week, furious that I asked him to tell me what he meant by a certain word. You're using a phrase like British culture very casually, but not being prepared to actually pin down what it means. And of course, it doesn't matter because it's a feeling that is being felt that can't be articulated, or if it is articulated, it will sound unpleasant. I don't like them because they don't look like me. And I don't like the idea of people who don't look like me or people who don't belong to my tribe getting something that I don't get myself, or get some. The reason I haven't got X is because they're getting Y. The reason I'm struggling to pay my bills is because asylum seekers are staying in repurposed hotels. And that's why I can also be persuaded that they're actually living in 5-star luxury when they're living in nothing of the sort. Because if I knew how they were living, I'd know that that's unlikely to be having much of an impact upon my daily existence. So it's all there, isn't it? It's all there. The seeds of dissatisfaction being very carefully watered by Keir Starmer this week, and quite dangerously. We shall see where it leads. But it's not the language that I'm interested in today. It's the target. And we've talked a lot about who Keir Starmer was talking to, and we have perhaps a clearer picture. And it is a picture that includes the tribalism that Finkelstein writes about in the Times, the queue place, the queue members that I talk about a lot on this programme. That's who he's talking to. But who is he talking about? And more pertinently, I think, is he talking about you? Because there's a tiny little story in one newspaper today. I may have appeared elsewhere, but almost half of foreign nurses, and this is according to recent research, I think conducted possibly before the speech even took place. I must double check that. No, it's subsequent to the speech. Almost half of foreign nurses plan to quit Britain because of its hostile immigration policy. And that explains the problem that successive politicians have had with this issue. doesn't it? It's a hostile immigration policy if you are a participant in it. It's open borders and uncontrolled if you are not. Keir Starmer electing to talk to the people in the latter category, but he's talking about the people in the former category. 55 international NHS nurses want to move away. And remember, this is a mobile population, language barriers notwithstanding. If they've already upped sticks and moved to a new country, then the ease of upping sticks and moving to a new country is much higher than it would be for somebody who's never made that leap. 42% of them blaming racism and Britain's unwelcoming attitude towards foreigners. This, as the Prime Minister's planned crackdown on immigration hasn't even got away. And again, the conundrum at the very heart of all these conversations, but one of the elements always studiously ignored by people feeding feelings while ignoring facts, is, as Professor Nicola Ranger of the Royal College of Nursing says, the NHS simply could not run without overseas staff. She's calling today on Sir Keir Starmer to waive red tape for nurses, as a succession of former Arsenal footballers moving to Britain from abroad. No, not nurses. And that is a tiny, tiny little nib on page 2, filed away in the basement of the Daily Telegraph. Half of foreign nurses intend to quit Britain. It should be slightly bigger news, shouldn't it? I mean, an intent is not necessarily the precursor to an action. But what does it mean to be the target of what Keir Starmer's talking about? Because the other phrase that helps enormously in the understanding of this tension, this eternal tension between facts and feelings, where the facts don't touch the sides of the feelings. The eternal tension, of course, is caught up in that phrase we first came across in 2016, that phrase, I don't mean you. Oh, I don't mean you. And Keir Starmer elevated that into an art form almost on Monday, talking about how much he values diversity and how important it is and the great role that immigration has played in this country. He's saying to some people here from elsewhere, oh, I don't mean you. I don't mean you. I mean the members of the squalid chapter. I mean the people turning us into an island of strangers. I don't mean you. As Sadiq Khan said yesterday, if you listen to the Prime Minister's speech, he also talked about diversity being a strength. But he said that after making it pretty clear how he felt about the language that the Prime Minister had deployed. I don't mean you. But how do you know that he doesn't mean you? And how does it feel to worry that he might? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How does it feel to, because, you know, here's a text from Tracy who says he's talking about the people who come here cheering on terrorists and supporting vile acts against people. Well, why are nurses queuing up to leave then, Tracy? Because you might think you know who he's talking about, but you just know for sure it's not you. Nurses think it is them. Half of them to a degree that makes them want to actually quit the country. People who we need desperately. How does it feel? And also people who've been here for 20 years, people who actually were around when Enoch Powell spoke of strangers in a completely different way, by the way. It is still very disingenuous to cite the ghost of Enoch Powell in the context of that speech, but it's Starmer's fault that the word strangers kicked open the door to that comparison. You couldn't make it in good faith if you'd ever read the Rivers of Blood speech or indeed paid proper attention to the context of what Keir Starmer was describing. But he opened the door to the comparison, and the comparison will stick around forever now. Some people, of course, will like it, but I don't believe at this point that that was the calculation. The simple question of how this week has made you a foreign-born Brit or an expat from elsewhere, or a migrant, or whatever word you prefer, how has it made you feel about your home? 0345 6060 973. Because I don't want to say that out loud. I'm not sure Keir Starmer cares. And that's why you need to tell me. How does this week make you feel about your home and how welcome, or indeed how homely, it feels today? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10. I mean, it is, I suppose, the definition of privilege to know for sure that he's not talking about you. I mean, I know Keir Starmer isn't talking about me. There's still a little bit of anti-Irish sentiment out there. And if someone hates you enough, then they'll find anything that they think that they might be able to hit you over the head with. But Keir Starmer wasn't talking about me when he talked about immigration being a squalid chapter, or about the dangers of being turned into an island of... Well, actually, do you know, he was kind of talking about me when he said island of strangers, because an island of strangers means that the island is full of strangers. It's full of people who don't feel kinship with each other, who feel like they don't know each other. So that would actually be all of us. But the blame for the UK becoming an island of strangers, or islands, to be technically correct, of strangers, the blame for it doesn't lie with people, quotes, like me, end quotes. It ends with people, quotes, like you, end quote. So how do you feel? Hassan is in Boreham Wood. Hassan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'd like to say that, the primary target seems to be people that are coming over, or have been in the last 10 years, 5 years. But a byproduct of that is people who are second-generation immigrants, people like me, my parents came over in the 60s. We're feeling like the direction of travel means that maybe in the years to come, we're also not welcome. You hear of stories in Germany where one of the parties is putting forward a policy of repatriating citizens, and it's scary, right? It's genuinely scary. We're with reform getting the election results. It's not beyond imagination that you could end up with a government headed by Farage.
And he of course, is very cosy with senior members of the AfD, the party that grew out of the embers of the Nazi movement, led for a while by the granddaughter of a senior Nazi. Remigration is the word that they use. And you're right, it has become a bit of a buzzword for the global far right. And you genuinely feel, because I don't want to put words into your mouth, I just want to be completely clear, that Keir Starmer has flirted with that sort of feeling this week.
I do. I feel like he's seeing the direction of the populist movement. He feels like I need to hoover up some of these, get these people back into the Labour Party. Now, people like me are politically homeless. We've got nowhere to turn to. We've got, and I'm being like, we're living a comfortable life here. We're doing fairly well, but and it's not just my family. We, like, people I know, we are like worried that in the next 5 years, 10 years, is that the kind of things that are going to be talked about? Repatriation.
And what about if it isn't? What about if it is just I don't like this phrase, but it is quite an effective one. If it is just the mood music of the country, has the mood music of your country changed in terms of your day-to-day interactions and how you feel as you go about your business in Boreham Wood?
It hasn't in my day-to-day. But we've like, I lived through the 70s and the 80s where racism was pretty bad.
Sure.
We were worried about getting beaten up as children of colour where I grew up.
Yes.
And then that all got better. And then 90s and 2000s, everything seemed like, okay, this racism we fixed it. It's done. Almost. Like I didn't feel it on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
But when you see what's happening in the news, you see the direction of travel, I'll be honest, we're nervous. Like, this is the only place I've ever called home. This is my home. And now it's kind of feeling like, gosh, we need a plan B. Like, what happens in 10 years' time if we are made to go somewhere else? And that I wouldn't have thought, I wouldn't have dreamed of that as a possibility 5 years ago.
It's I mean, you describe something that Jewish callers over the years have told me that their families have lived with. But oddly, you echo the words of a Muslim friend of mine, quite a prominent politician, actually, over the course of the last few years. Not the one that was in the studio yesterday, who has had this conversation with their family and actually talked about having a plan B, having an option. I find that. I mean,
we're having this conversation throughout my family, my siblings, my cousins. Like, what's the plan? We're like, where could we go? And this isn't just me being dramatic.
No.
We're having these like, could there be a possibility? Could we try the Middle East? Like, where is our exit strategy? What do we do if things go bad?
And that feeling was there last week, last month, last year. It's got, and you just feel that Keir Starmer has joined the conversation in a sense.
I think what the scary thing is naturally we've been Labour supporters, right? This has been our political home, and now it's across the board. Like, where do we turn? Where's the champion?
So that's your domestic problem in terms of where you stick your ex. But the rather bigger problem, if things continue in the direction you describe, is where do you stick yourself? Where do you stick your family? Touching a lot of people there, Hassan. Jill in Thatcham writes, this guy is talking for me. I'm 56, born here. Feel like my country doesn't love me anymore, so how can I love it back? I too feel like we're going to be shipped out. Well, I wish I could sit here and say, don't be soft. But you've got parties on the march, most obviously in Germany and Austria, I guess, who are talking about remigration. I mean, Donald Trump essentially is trying to introduce a sort of form of mass deportation. It is always the question of, if you feed that appetite, what do they call for next? Because they never say, oh, I'm happy now. I'm happy with my lot. I'm comfortable. They want more. What more? And of course, there's always people queuing up to tell them that they deserve more. They should get more. So we've done this, we've done that, we've brought the numbers down, we've closed this route, we've reduced these visas. What do you want now? Well, there's still too many people who don't look like me living on my street. And that's what Hassan is describing. I can't reassure him that he's wrong, I don't think, as a white man. I don't know. Maybe I should try. Maybe you should. But I don't know what words I would use if I did. Yasser is in Bishop Stortford. Yasser, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, first-time caller here.
Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, so I'm on the other side. I'm not even British. I'm an immigrant. I'm still on the skilled worker visa status.
Right.
So yeah, everything has been said. The beginning of this week was, and absolutely, they're talking about me exactly. So how do we feel? Not very welcomed. We came here about now almost 4.5 years ago. We came in the middle of the pandemic, exactly.
Gosh.
Yeah, my wife was hired to be work as a doctor here in one of the NHS hospitals. Yeah, she was frontliner, and she was working.
She came to where did you come from, Yasser?
We are Egyptian, but we were living in Dubai.
But so you came here to work or your wife came here to work as a doctor in the middle of the pandemic. And that is part of the squalid chapter of immigration that Keir Starmer has described. And I don't know how he would convince you that it isn't. Oh, no, I don't. Well, you know what he'd say, Yasser? I don't mean you. I don't mean you.
No, it's actually me. So yeah, I was actually working as well, but mine was not like a critical care worker. Okay. So I used to work from home, and she was going every single day to work in the hospital through the pandemic, trying to serve as much as possible.
Of course.
Yeah, and towards the end of this year, we were actually going to settle and go for the indefinite leave to remain.
Well, you'd be nearly 5 years, weren't you, if you came during the pandemic?
Exactly. So now with these changes, we don't know exactly what would be the plans. Is it going to, let's continue staying here? Let's not.
Well, let me ask you a theoretical, if I may. Well, you've already moved into the realms of theories. And so if there is a dispensation for doctors and their families, would your approach to that question of what do we do next be different post Keir Starmer's speech? Would it be different this week than it was last week? So if you were still able to stay, and I think you probably will be, on the 5-year ticket rather than the 10-year ticket, is there something in the air around you that's changed this week, or is it actually still pretty much the same proposition that it would have been last week or last year?
No, it has changed drastically for the past, I would say, one and a half year. Now, when I go through London, especially when I go with my Shieldsfield, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I have seen it a lot. People looking at us up from above, and they are looking at us like strangers. We have been actually shouted at before in one of London's buses.
Right.
You're taking our jobs. So I said, all right, please come and take mine. I don't mind at all. If you can do it, do it.
Can I ask what you do? Can I ask what you yourself do?
Well, I'm a sales manager for testing equipment for scientific experiments, so mainly for universities, researchers.
And so this is the point, isn't it? Because a lot of people listening have probably missed the distinction, because it doesn't affect them directly, between skilled and unskilled. And the conversation, the speech on Monday, you're right. It spoke about skilled. It spoke about jobs. So, this is very much for the we should train your own brigade, who never really have an answer to the question about why they haven't trained to be a doctor or a nurse, or to have the technical skills that you have. You've taken me right through the news, right? So I'm running a bit late, but final question. What do you think you're going to do?
Well, it's either going to Canada, join my family there, who actually live there, and then in 3 years' time they were all Canadian and proud.
Yes.
Or go back again, maybe Middle East, if things go worse. But to be honest, we're still doing fine here.
Good.
The neighborhood is lovely, but what would happen, especially when my kid goes to secondary school, that's going to be a completely different story.
I hear you. And again, as with Hassan, I hope that you're wrong, but it's certainly not my place to tell you that you are. And when you draw upon personal experiences like the ones you have described, it would be incredibly condescending and bad, wrong, crass of me to try to even hold that. I just don't want it to be true, but I think it almost certainly is. 10:32 is the time. Remember, as I bid farewell to Yasser, it frees up a phone line for you if you're struggling to get through. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. And Amelia Cox now has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
35 is the time. This is an interesting piece by a journalist you may be aware of called Fraser Nelson, who, when he was editor of The Spectator, did more to introduce a pretty rancid racism to public discourse than almost anybody else in British journalism. But his defence was always that as editor, all opinions were welcome. Andrew Neil, of course, was the publisher of the magazine throughout that hideous period. But no longer at The Spectator, writing an article for The Telegraph just before Christmas, he pointed out something that you will not believe. He pointed out that in this country, migration levels have doubled while the crime rate has halved. That's our violent crime rate. Migration levels, he wrote, have hit unprecedented levels, but over the past 15 years, our violent crime rate has halved to an all-time low. Our streets are now safer than they perhaps have ever been. And as I say, this isn't some woolly liberal writing the article. It's the bloke responsible for bringing you the SS sympathies of a Greek writer called Taki and the thoughts of various other people who sort of revel in being controversial and unpleasant. This may sound impossible, writes Nelson, how to reconcile this, and this is a point I've made to you a million times, with all the social media videos of bike thefts and masked knife-wielding thugs. What about all the talk of a crime wave? Well, for decades, the British Crime Survey has gauged how many crimes have taken place, whether reported or not, and it shows that assault and neighbourhood crime are down by 50% over 15 years, even bicycle theft down. Remember, these are crimes reported or not. down by 60%. Criminal damage down by 75%. Some crimes, of course, are rising, but in the context of a stunning overall decline. And so when you've got a former editor of The Spectator writing this sentence, our immigration population has almost doubled while our crime rate has halved. And you've got a Labour Prime Minister talking about a squalid chapter of immigration unfolding over almost exactly the same period. How on earth do you know whether or not he is talking about you? It is absolutely extraordinary. And today we learn that half the foreign-born nurses here are minded to up sticks and move somewhere else. Here's Ian. He put his full name on his message, Ian Atkinson. The party is over. The indigenous population want their country back and have had enough of the freeloading immigrants, he says in a conversation that has so far focused on nurses and a doctor. The country is finished. I live near Bradford in West Yorkshire, and it's like some sort of third world ghetto. So that is yesterday's show. Who is Keir Starmer talking to? Is he talking to people like Ian, or is he talking to people who are a little bit nicer or a little bit less alienated, a little bit less angry? But today's show is who is he talking about? And it is, as we're discovering, people like Hassan. It is people like all the people getting in touch with me to tell them that they feel personally targeted. Doesn't matter how loudly people like Ian shout about freeloading immigrants. It's precisely the opposite of that category, which is, of course, almost all of the people who've come here from overseas to work that will feel Keir Starmer is after them today. Jabulani is in Edinburgh. What would you like to say?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Very well. What's on your mind?
As much as I respect your view of him saying squalid as in the process of the immigration, would it be too far to say that he was talking about the people themselves that are squalid?
I don't know why he'd use that word if he didn't want someone to take that thought away from
100%. That's exactly how I felt about it when he used that specific word. I'm an immigrant to the country. I've been here for just a little over 4 years. My indefinite leave to remain is coming up at the end of this year. And I feel that the words that Keir Starmer said yesterday personally targeted myself as an immigrant. I came through the right channels, which were laid out by the British government. I've paid my dues, I pay my taxes, I've followed the letter to the law. And yet I'm being targeted for doing the right thing. I don't think that's very fair to us people that are trying to do the right thing, come to the country the right way, and build up the country itself.
The distinction is moot, isn't it, for people like the messenger I just read out? It's usually a bit of a giveaway when someone uses the word indigenous, but the determination to believe that everybody who doesn't look like him is a freeloader or a criminal or a wrong-un has been in our political bloodstream forever. And of course, in recent years, it started pumping rather more enthusiastically, partly as a consequence of Brexit, partly as a consequence of some of the beasts that released. But this week felt different to you because it was a Labour Prime Minister using the language and changing the rules for people like you.
100%. He used very extreme language. For Labour to be leaning right with the words that he used is something that baffles me, because Labour was brought into power by people who believed in what he said previously. Because earlier on, prior to him being elected, he was pro-immigration. He stood out and said, we will not do this to immigrants. We want immigrants. Immigrants are helping us here, there, and everywhere. And then 5 years later, just because Nigel Farage was gaining a couple of polls...
well, he did. I think that's part of it, but he did have in the manifesto sort of some indications of the direction that things were going to go in, but I don't know that anyone was paying much attention to those parts of the manifesto at the time. But yes, there is certainly a sense that he's trying to appeal to people like our friend Indigenous Ian, and that is very much Farage territory.
Correct. And I find that extremely hurtful. My wife and I sat down yesterday before going to work on the floor discussing what our options are. We have family that's here as well.
Yes.
My nephews are studying law at the moment, and they're looking forward to working in the UK. He's studying family law. He wants to help children who are in abusive homes and so on and so forth. But now he feels that he's been targeted as well, and he doesn't know if he has an option to stay in the country or to have to find another means to leave somewhere else. It's quite upsetting.
And I don't know. And you may not either, but what does resolution look like? When I've got a word I use a bit. It's a weird word to use, but I think it might be pertinent. I talk about unclenching. You know, if you live your life in a state of tension, you think it's normal, a state of suspense. Things are not as clear-cut for you as they might be for other people. You're in a state of one. When do you unclench, if ever, from the feelings that you're feeling this week?
So, with the way things are going, there doesn't seem to be a point in time when we can unclench. Even if the process of indefinite leave to remain comes into place, we don't know if we'll be comfortable being here anymore because of the rhetoric that was spewed by Starmer yesterday. It has put a massive cloud over our heads, and we don't have a positive feeling of the process of immigrating into the United Kingdom.
And that cannot be an accident from the Downing Street perspective. It is a sense, it's why I paused and thought a little bit before saying I don't think he cares about you or how you have been made to feel this week, because if he did, he wouldn't have done it. And it's not, as Jabulani has perfectly picked up on, it's not the content exclusively of the migration bill. Some of the stuff there about how long you will have to wait or the hoops you're going to have to jump through is unpleasant, perhaps, or designed to make things look more robust, more controlled. But the choice of words is what seems to have resonated with people in ways that the detail of the white paper just won't. Jabulani, take care, as with all the callers and most of the texters this morning. I wish I could be more reassuring. Pamir is in Preston. Pamir, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. It's the first time, to be honest, that I'm phoning any radio show while driving back from a night shift in a busy Manchester hospital. I'm a doctor. I was just listening to your show, and I just thought I need to phone for the first time, and I don't know if I'll do it again.
Thank you. Well, I'll do my best to make you feel welcome.
Thank you.
Go on.
And I just wanted to say that, the Prime Minister's speech and specifically the tone in the words he used has definitely worsened my feelings that have been there for the last couple of years at least with everything going on. Just to give you a bit of
Yes.
details. I'm French with settled status here, but originally from Afghanistan, trained a doctor there. And both myself and my wife, we are doctors. We left France about 8 years ago, came to this country where we thought the rhetoric was diversity is a value, in contrast to the French system where diversity is kind of considered a threat.
Okay. Gosh. Even 8 years ago, we still had that sort of status in your mind in the world. That's quite nice to know.
Exactly. That's what I felt, and have gone through all these steps and worked here for the last 8 years, including pandemic. At one point, I was even myself in serious condition because of the COVID and everything.
Right.
I'm now nearly a consultant in a year time, and I should be thinking about establishing myself in working somewhere. But honestly, I haven't yet applied for the British nationality because I had double feelings. Okay, that may give me a little more, in terms of stability and security. But then no, like Marine Le Pen in France always talked about sending back even second, third generation French to Algeria and to Morocco. So the same could happen here. So I said, there's no point. It doesn't really matter if you have French nationality or you have a settled status. If they want to change, they can change in weeks, as Prime Minister Keir Starmer has changed, I think, over the course of the last few weeks or months, maybe, with the types of words and the type of rhetoric he's using now.
So the spokesman said yesterday that the Prime Minister absolutely stands behind the argument he was making that migrants make a massive contribution to our country, but migration needs to be controlled. Why doesn't that comfort you?
Look, there is a way of telling anything, and there is, a way of expression. The way, specifically the word using, an island of strangers, it just gives me the feeling of what I was listening in French, as they call it their, l'assimilation française, to translate it in English, like the assimilation. They don't believe in integration. So you have to look like them or behave like them and forget completely about your identity and your origin. And that's not possible. So when hearing the words of Prime Minister talking about an island of strangers, you immediately think that he's talking about me. Yes, he will say, I'm not talking about doctors, I'm not talking about nurses. I have got 95% of my colleagues are immigrants like myself from different countries, and they're all worried, and they're all not sure of staying here. They're all looking for opportunities in places to go somewhere else, because it's not just to say, you are welcome here now, but the next day in Parliament you hear words as we just heard a couple of days ago.
This is a simplistic question, and it will probably offend your academic sensibilities, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can you put numbers on it? So your misgivings on a scale of 1 to 10, where they were last week and where they are this week as a consequence of what Keir Starmer has said and done. So your misgivings about all of the things that you've just described to us.
Yeah, I mean, it was, to be honest, not very good always.
Sure.
Anyway, it was around 5, 6, but it's definitely now aging to that 8 and 9.
Good Lord. I'm sorry. And where do you find comfort? I mean, all of the people, not all of the people, obviously, but many, most of the people listening to this programme feel nothing but gratitude and warmth towards you and your family. Where do you find comfort in the context of what you've just described, if at all?
To be very honest, the only place I find comfort is when I'm at work. And it's very grateful that I'm helping people, and I see people smiling after they have heart attacks and they get better. But as soon as you're out of the hospital, on a street or somewhere else, and then you're looked at as someone who is living on benefits probably, or stealing their jobs or whatever, in that you can't not just hang your diploma and your qualifications on your forehead and say like, hang on a minute, I'm the one who is, not only serving here, but also contributing significantly with tens of thousands of pounds every year to the, to the tax system and everything. I'm
sorry. Can I make a light-hearted observation, or would that be inappropriate?
No, I think you're absolutely right to.
Well, I want you to. Do you know why I want you to stay? I want you to stay for at least 5 more years, so that the next time you ring me, I won't just be able to hear the French and the Afghan in your accent. I'll be able to hear the Lancashire as well, because I don't know. I think these are the best examples sometimes of integration. We had a caller earlier this week whose Scottish accent came through from her country of origin's accent, and I don't know. There's something that speaks to assimilation or integration when you do that. But I'm not hearing any Lancashire at the moment from here.
Probably because I've been in here for 2 years, mostly been down in Southampton. I don't know, but maybe still the French accent is very
that'll
strong.
be it. No, that could be it, actually. But thank you. It was Joanna, wasn't it, in Stirling, who's Polish originally. She's called us a couple of times, but whose accent now betrays evidence of how long she spent in Scotland. And my all-time favourite in this category is the footballer Jan Molby, who, of course, picked up Scouse inflections when he was at Liverpool, and he even picked up a little bit of kiddie when he was the manager of Kidderminster Harriers. And I'm glad we can bring a bit of lightheartedness into the conversation, because otherwise it's pretty bleak. And remember, this is it. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a Labour Prime Minister trying to keep Indigenous Ian happy by making people like Pamir and Hassan and all my other callers and texters feel, I'm going to use the word, persecuted. It's 10 to 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:53. Here's another example of what Keir Starmer is apparently wooing. Simon in Brighton puts, please read out at the bottom of his text. In fact, please read out. Your doctor caller said 95% of his friends were immigrants. There's no H in were, and I've stopped pointing out things like that recently, but given that the English language test is a big part of what Keir Starmer has been talking about this week, it's pertinent to point out how many people would fail it. There lies the problem. They don't want to integrate into UK culture, just stick to their culture and religious beliefs. There is spelled THEIR in that context, Simon. That's what's happening with all different nationalities. Please read out. I will. He said 95% of his colleagues were immigrants, Simon, in the hospital in Manchester where he works. So just take a moment now to explain to the class how that provides evidence of a failure to integrate and just sticking to their culture and religious beliefs. Leaving aside for the moment that you can spell neither there nor there, actually. You've used it wrong in both contexts. But how does a doctor working with 95% foreign-born colleagues prove anything other than the necessity and importance of immigration to this country. You absolute wally. Honestly, mate. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a little look at the kind of messages that you send in to LBC. Law and order and women's rights. You said it, Sheila. Sharia law and no rights for women or gay people. That's what most Muslims believe, but you never read it out. What is wrong with saying we are an island of strangers? It's the truth. Wherever I work in the UK. Yvette Blooper, that woman is useless. Knife crime. Ask the question. Your callers are right. Most immigrants are rude with no morals. So there is Simon, thinking that other people are rude with no morals and that immigration is the source of his problems. Geeta is in Forest Gate. Geeta, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
I think I'm feeling nervous, not about talking to you, but about the subject matter,
Yes.
because I have felt completely discombobulated for the last 3 days. I haven't got it out of my head. I wake up thinking about the speech and its impact, and I'm going to try and be brief on 3 things.
Okay.
I think the first thing about a response to your question, who is he talking about? And I was saying to your producer that I don't think it kind of doesn't matter, because it's what's more important is how it's landing. And I think I don't want to be involved in creating divisions amongst people who are not white British. I'm not interested in I've been here, I was born here, I'm a Londoner, I was born in the 60s, and, I don't want to see that narcissus of small things, that difference with the people who may have come in the last 10 years. And I feel like the language that was used is irresponsible, really dangerous. And I think you described it as like flirting with, and I thought that was spot on, because I feel like he's touched into the sort of space of the sort of middle classes and just trying to seed something there. So I don't think it is just about like the reform types. I think that he's kind of flirting with something in that space.
Yeah.
The second thing I want to say is I have found myself constantly thinking in the last 2 days about the contribution that I and my family have made since their arrival in the early 60s. My late mum from a year ago, she used to do voluntary work with Age UK, go and befriend old, lonely white women in their homes. And, my family work in health. And then I had to stop myself, because I am done with justifying my contribution and my validity in this country. And I'm so fed up with it, because I don't know when it's going to be enough. I don't know when it will ever be enough. When will it be good enough? And when will this abstract notion of integration, and it does feel like one way, where it should be reciprocated. And I really feel like Keir Starmer could have really framed this as reciprocated enrichment. What do we get, not just what people bring to this country. And the third thing I just want to say very quickly is this thing about an immigrant or a migrant is, people have dreams and they have aspirations and they have hopes for their family and they have identities of their own. And I've struggled so much with this notion of what makes a good immigrant and how do people self-identify. So I'll pause there. But I've had so many thoughts going through my head, but they were the 3 big things. Politically, what this has done, and there's no way this was happenstance. They're way too considered and way too aware to have just dropped this in by chance.
I wonder how I respond to that. And from their point of view, I say something like, if we do make it clearer that the people who fit some of the stereotypes are being prevented from coming here or staying here, and you are not one. So I'm trying to work out what the slightly more sophisticated version of, oh no, I don't mean you, Geeta, is, because you clearly feel that they do mean you. And they would say, no, we're talking about people with no skills. We're talking about people with no investment in our society. I don't know who Indigenous Ian or Simple Simon would be thinking of when they send texts like the ones they send to the station. But and I doubt it, to be fair, but if they didn't mean you and Labour was targeting the people that they are thinking of when they talk about freeloading and lack of integration, could that make your life better? If it actually becomes a system in which the people perceived as abusing the system are no longer able to? That's a reach, isn't it? I can't believe how desperate I sound, frankly, but I've tried.
What I would say to that is, that's not a world I want to be part of.
Right.
That mindset and that way of being is not something that I'm interested in. Why do I want to kind of highlight and focus in on difference? My husband's why I'm involved across a range of different things. I think about the carers who looked after my mum, and highly skilled, all from other parts of the world. Are they the ones he's talking about?
Last chance at comforting you, and I don't think it'll work, but this is Mark in Islington's attempt, which is probably better than mine. I'm no Reform voter or Tory or Brexiteer, but surely Keir Starmer hurting a few feelings with his language may help keep away from power the people that would turn the language into a reality. And he suggests that might be a good thing, but I suspect you've already answered that question in your last comment.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't think this is just about feelings. This is, I feel like this is if I'm going to bring it full circle, I feel like this is from a politics point of view, I feel like this is a planned discourse shift for the Labour Party, and I feel like they may be moving in a certain direction, and that's
socially conservative, economically liberal, socially conservative. Where does it leave you politically? I know that's not as important as some of the other issues that you've raised, but where does it leave you politically?
Well, I took a lot of flack for voting for Keir Starmer last year. I didn't think Corbyn was a good fit for PM. I think he has done amazing activism work, but
I agree.
It wasn't for me. He absolutely has blown it for me. I think I was on that road anyway in the last few months, but this has finished me really, and so I think I'm going green.
I'm going green.
Yeah,
it's not easy being green, Geeta, but I wish you luck. 2 minutes after 11, and if a Muppets-based joke can't unite the population, then frankly I don't know what can. Oh boy, what an hour! It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we'll continue with this conversation, but we should bring some more elements into it as well, if you have any suggestions to make. It's going to be about the surrendering of facts to feelings, isn't it? And you could probably make a case, if you were minded to, that Keir Starmer has been left with little choice by the ecosystem in which he operates, and in which he somehow, against all the odds really, you would need to have had conservative catastrophes of almost unprecedented scale to just allow that tiny little a slither of light in the locked door, under the locked door, to creep under the locked door as a Labour Prime Minister who hadn't really done any of the things that Tony Blair had done in the run-up to 1997, except, I suppose, inherit an enormous mess. But the ecosystem in which a Labour Prime Minister can't even go to the football without getting attacked by the world and his wife is one in which the attitude towards immigration has been carefully cultivated, and here we are. It is the consequence of that cultivation that we live in a country where a Labour Prime Minister feels the need to talk about a squalid chapter and an island of strangers. I haven't read this through yet. It just popped in as I started talking about the question of whether Keir Starmer has acted with an air of inevitability. Bernard says, James, you're making a complete pig's ear of this conversation. And I haven't read it yet, so if I stop halfway through and go straight to the calls, it's because Bernard gets a little bit potty-mouthed or something similar. You're making a complete pig's ear of this conversation and doing a complete disservice to Sir Keir. Why would you send him into a gunfight with a knife and one hand tied behind his back? You are letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. It is much better to back Keir Starmer against Farage, unless you have to do the bidding of your paymasters and play your Labour-bashing channel part at work. Yeah, I did tell you I hadn't read this through in advance. The idea that I'm part of a Labour-bashing movement, Bernard, that's sort of borderline call the nurses territory. And by the way, The lady can be sure that if she votes Green, she will get Farage. Yeah, you see, the problem you're making there, Bernard, is you're negating the contributions of people who feel personally targeted by what Keir Starmer said this week. Neither you nor I have the right to tell them to shut up and sit down. Happily, one of us is here to tell them to stand up and speak. Which brings us to Bilal, who's in Ilford. Bilal, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. So just a couple of things. First, I want to say that because Keir Starmer is basically making sweeping statements, he isn't actually qualifying and nailing down exactly what he means and who he's referring to. This affects me as a second-generation immigrant to the UK. And I don't want to have to qualify or justify my contribution to the country, but I feel like I need to, just to make my other point.
Because he's created two... I'm interrupting you, and I'll let you pick up where you've left off, but I just want to be clear that I understand the first bit of what you've said. Because he has created two categories of migrant or migrant family, in your case. Two categories, second generation or first generation, but the categories are not generational. The categories are valued and not valued.
Exactly. And
he hasn't told us what the difference is.
Yeah, that's it. So because he hasn't done that, he's making a sweeping statement and playing into the language of Farage. Basically, it makes someone like myself feel in that second category of being unvalued by someone white, indigenous, walking down the road and looking at me, for example. So just to sort of give you a bit of background, I was born in the late 70s in London. Went to school, university, set up a business which is successful. We employed 20 plus people. We're a net importer of wealth into the country because most of our customers are abroad. So we're bringing in money to the country. We pay 6 figures in tax every year. And we help our local community a lot as well. So I don't want to have to say all that, but the point I'm saying that is because I don't wear that as a label on my T-shirt when I'm walking around London or outside London, when anywhere in the UK. And if someone looking at me, because I'm brown, I've got a beard, I'm visibly Muslim, I will feel uncomfortable. And I have those eyes, more and more it feels like with this kind of language going on in politics from our government, it's making me feel more like an outsider, even though I've been born and brought up and contribute to this country very much so. And for me, the most important thing is my children. I've got teenage children, visibly Muslim as well. My daughter wears a hijab, and I feel really uncomfortable now with her walking around because I fear for her safety because the language is being used.
Yeah. And it's got measurably worse in the last 10 years.
100%.
And is set to get worse still as the Faragists continue their political surge.
And that makes me question, do I want my kids to grow up in that sort of environment? Because when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was pretty bad. And I don't want my kids to have to experience what I experienced back then. So it's making me question, do I really want to stay here and have my kids face that sort of racism that I faced when I was young?
What are your options?
Well, I mean, fortunately, I have a business which
is quite
successful,
potentially mobile.
And it's mobile. I don't have to be in the country because my sales and my customers are all international. So I could, not easily, but I do have the option of relocating everything that I do to a more welcoming and friendly society. I don't want to do that. I do love the country. I've been here all my life, but I've got to think about the future and about my kids.
And I'm going to ask you what I asked Pamir earlier, the doctor who came here from Afghanistan via France, but hasn't yet picked up any Lancashire accent in Preston. If your misgivings about all the things we're discussing were plotted on a chart of 1 to 10, where was it last week and where is it this week? Because it is, of course, Keir Starmer's speech that's prompted this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's easily gone up 3 points from what Keir Starmer said.
Wow. And again, as I failed to do with Gita, to defend him, and I don't want to, but to be the devil's advocate, I certainly don't want to defend the use of the words that we keep returning to, and that Sadiq Khan couldn't disguise his disgust at yesterday in the studio. When he talks about the value that immigration has brought to the country, when he talks about the great role that it plays and the great history that it has, why aren't you comforted by those words as opposed to being scared or upset by the other words?
Because when he talks about the positives that immigration has to the country, unfortunately, most of that falls on deaf ears when it comes to, the sort of, let's say, white working class or white indigenous people who already look at us with suspicion and already, for decades, I would say Muslims in particular, not just in this country, but in the West, have been demonized and dehumanized. And that just plays into the psyche of people, because when they see us, they don't look at us as, oh, they're contributing to society, or they're really good because they've done X, Y, and Z, or they don't see any of that because they can't. They just see a person and his image and what he looks like. So,
and people are telling them that people who look like that are terrorists or
Exactly.
criminals or all manner of wrong-uns, and there's nothing you can do to shake that off. And Keir Starmer seemed on Monday to be addressing that constituency of people. And just for the record, I know you didn't mean, when you talked about the white working class, everybody in that demographic, but you're talking about the kind of people that have sent in the text that I've read out today. For me, I think a much bigger problem that the country faces is the posh people who hold exactly the same views but write about it in the Spectator magazine instead of on toilet walls. That, I think, is what has infected the discourse to the degree that Farage can assume a cloak of respectability and Starmer can feel that he has little choice but to follow. It's not actually the kind of people that might have been trying to set fire to repurposed hotels during the Farage riots. It's the kind of people writing editorials, columns for the Daily Telegraph or the Spectator magazine. But hey, that's just me. That's probably a bit Anaraki. Thank you, Bilal, and sorry, it's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:17, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I should probably remind you that it is Thursday. No, I shouldn't. It's Wednesday, which means that PMQs is coming up at 12 noon today. Natasha Clark joining me to look ahead to what Kemi Badenoch is likely to go in with, and then we will actually listen to it to find out whether either of us have got it vaguely right. And then we're going to be joined by two guests after the 12:30 news, as is becoming customary on a Wednesday. One is a former Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Neil Basu, who's already appeared on my Full Disclosure podcast, but whose new book, Turmoil, 30 Years of Policing, Politics and Prejudice, feels particularly timely. And then Lucy Easthope, the disaster response expert, whose first book was such an enormous smash hit, has written another one, Life-Changing Lessons for Coping with Crisis, which brings us back to where I opened the programme this morning, talking about the distinction between what is good for business and what is bad for the soul, because crises are good for my business, It's a weird thing, but they're not good for my soul. It's a strange situation that you find yourself in, but Lucy runs towards crises when they happen, and has attempted to bring some of the lessons she's learnt from those moments into the broader human experience. When the Dust Settles, of course, was her first. But Lucy's also been on Full Disclosure, actually. It's an amazing canon now. Of how many downloads of Full Disclosure do you think there have been since it started? Do you want to have a guess? Well, first of all, when did it start? Do we know when it started? When did it start, roughly? About 4 years ago or something? Is it more? 5 years? Is it longer than that ago? Anyway, a while. It's been running a while. And how many downloads, how many individual episodes do you think have been downloaded? Actually have a guess, but take it seriously. Don't tease me. And then I'll tell you what the correct answer is if I remember, or indeed if Keith reminds me. But we're back to the question of this. Listen, I think at one point when I was a bit more hot-headed, a bit less thoughtful, I probably would have argued with people today. I probably would have sought to say you're seeing the worst of what could be seen. But that is such a patronising and arrogant position to take. If I was of migrant stock, which technically actually I am, but it's a bit complicated. If I was of migrant stock, particularly if I was visibly not Anglo-Saxon or couldn't be mistaken, they use the word passing. If I could not pass as what Ian describes as indigenous, whatever that means, demonstrates a profound ignorance of that DNA that they discovered in the Cheddar Gorge a few years ago, doesn't it? But that's by the by. I would be responding differently, I think, to Keir Starmer's speech from how I am responding, and I'm responding negatively enough. So I told you not to be mean. Rob has said, is it 4, James? 4 downloads of my podcast, full disclosure, and who's this? Liam has said, is it 11? You're all hilarious. You're all absolutely hilarious. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Neelima is in Stanmore. Neelima, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I wanted to share my story. So, which is my husband and I came to London in 95-96 on British travelling scholarships to study at London School of Economics and Imperial, respectively. And we have always contributed to the system. We look visibly like immigrants because obviously we are brown and we've immigrated from India.
Yes.
We have 2 boys who are now in their early 20s who one is at a wonderful university, again Imperial, the other one passed out of a great university from here and working in a great place here. But my concern is if this word immigrant were to trigger any reaction amongst people who are not fully aware of how people are coming in, I am okay. My husband and I are okay. If we are pushed to go back, we'll go back to India and we're comfortable there. But our boys think they are British in every which way. They do not consider the thought of even going back to India. So I feel leaders have to be a little more responsible. They should not just use words like immigrants. They should also, if they're using a blanket word, they might as well use people who are not contributing to the let's say, to the government or to the society. They should possibly use words like that because there are people like us who've never taken anything from the system. We only added to the system. Our children went to private school. We have private insurance. So, yeah, that's why I called.
And you feel that, I mean, intentionally, well, actually, I'll ask you whether you feel it was intentional, because you clearly feel that you have been caught up in Keir Starmer's rhetoric. Your family has been caught.
To be honest, none of us have ever felt overt racism or discrimination, so that I'm very glad about.
Fantastic.
We are very comfortable in London. I mean, as you can probably hear, I still have my Indian accent, but I've never felt uncomfortable.
Yes.
But going forward, I mean, as I said, I am of a certain age, but my children are young and they are very much British. So, sorry, what was your question, James?
Do you think that Keir Starmer intended people like your sons to feel?
I think he just was trying to get some reaction. He wasn't thinking deeply about it. He just wanted a reaction just to keep him going for some weeks.
Yeah, and appealing to people who aren't going to be worried about your feelings.
Just to keep people busy with...
Well, do you think perhaps he's appealing to people who will be objecting to your description of your own sons as being British?
There could be people, because as I said, visibly we are brown. They don't know what we are about, right? So they could easily, if they're angry on a certain day because they don't have a job or whatever be the case, they could easily take their anger out on somebody who doesn't look like an indigenous white person.
And what could Keir Starmer say? I know you've given me one example, but what could he say that might reassure you?
I think he needs to correct his language and possibly say we should be looking at adding more value to the society by actually doing meaningful work rather than using terms like immigrants, because most immigrants come in because they want to study higher, they want to...
But these are the facts, you see, so these don't change, and you've got people texting about towns in particularly in the north of England where the communities have settled, and you'll see on many streets in many parts of town more faces that look like yours, Neelima, than you will faces that look like mine, but that actually has nothing to do with recent immigration. That's you're never going to be able to reach that anger.
I don't have an answer for what Keir Starmer could say, sadly, but I'm sure he can rejig his words and assure people that, you know what, let everybody have some respect.
Because that is what he appears to have failed to do, is to reassure people that he does indeed respect them, and in this case respect you. Thank you, Neelima. 24 minutes after 11. Sorry, James, but guess how many downloads that we've done in full disclosure reminds me of David Brent talking about how many CDs he sold. It's got to be more than that, hasn't it, Keith? I can't remember how many CDs David Brent sold, but it's got to be more than that. I've got some breaking news for you, if you care. The bloke who was in Reform and then wasn't in Reform, Rupert Lowe, has no charges will be brought against the former Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe after claims that he made verbal threats towards the party's chairman. The Great Yarmouth MP was suspended from Nigel Farage's party in March amid a deepening civil war and allegations about his conduct, which he denies. The head of the CPS, Malcolm McHaffey, that's a great name, Malcolm McHaffey, said, following a thorough and detailed review of the evidence in relation to an allegation of threats, we have decided that no criminal charges should be brought against a sitting MP. Having considered a number of witness statements, we have concluded that there is insufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction. So I guess the rats will start fighting once again in the sack, although I don't imagine that what's his chops Lowe will get the whip. Who knows? It's not exactly a political party that is run according to traditional or indeed respectable practices, is it? So who knows what will happen next? And I don't want to say who cares, because it is mildly interesting. 26 after 11 is the time. KK is in Colchester. KK, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Please, this is a subject that is make me so emotional. So please help me to try and keep being to make sense.
Of course, I'm sure you won't need any help, but I'm here if you need.
So, what the politicians say, they don't know how it affects people when we think that they are talking about us. I've been here for almost 20 years now. I've served in the military as a nurse, and I am black. But when I feel I've contributed positively to the economy, and I try to integrate. And when we talk about integration, it's not easy to integrate, because sometimes people can accept you as you are, or they can just block you. Like what you have, I think you say a lot of things that resonate with me. Like, you are an immigrant from Ireland, and I'm an immigrant from Africa, but I am more visible than you are. So people can see me and decide how they want to treat me before they even speak to me, whereas they will give you an opportunity and then you can make a mark. But when Keir Starmer then says things like he has said, trying to paint a picture that we are working towards a good immigration, which I am for, but he is putting me in that sort of like picture of that
firing
line
category. He's not distinguishing between the people he means and the people he doesn't mean, which means that people will think he means you.
Yes. So when I go out there, I feel the animosity. I feel that I'm black. Even when I go to the NHS for help, I am feeling the judgment of that I'm black, and I'm trying to take the place, no matter what I've done, what I've contributed, because I can't write it on my forehead to say I'm an immigrant. I'm contributing positively to the economy, and I love this country because I am in it. Yeah.
I don't know, again, you certainly didn't need any help from me in expressing yourself very powerfully and clearly, KK, but I don't know what the response from me should be. I was reading earlier an article in the Times by Daniel Finkelstein, who talks about tribes and about how there is a sort of almost a hardwired, it's an academic theory that it's almost hardwired into us to feel two things, really. Everybody thinks they are the big contributors, and everybody thinks their tribe is the big contributors. And if you don't look like you're part of the same tribe that I am part of, then it is almost inevitable to at least have the beginnings of feelings that you're taking something away from me, something that should be rightfully mine. The way Finkelstein puts it when he's talking about Nigel Farage is that he has an instinctive understanding of this. He appreciates that whatever the story, voters think that someone is taking out what they themselves put in. And that's the distinction, I think, ethnically, that Starmer appears to have fed this week. He's painting you as part of the section of society that is taking out and talking about, I mean, without defining it or specifying it, everybody else being the people that are put in.
Yes. To add on to that, a couple of weeks ago, I read an article. I hope you can go and look at it.
Yes, I will.
It's an opinion article, so I don't know what you make of that. And that was saying immigration policy should be ruthless on poor communities, poor countries. But
right, yes.
in the article, the person was kind of saying white people contribute positively, Asians, and I hope I'm not being racist when I say that, Asians are on the second
right.
from that. And then black people, it was actually saying that black people contribute negatively, so they shouldn't. That's how I took from it. They shouldn't be allowed to come and take from. And that piece almost made me feel like, hang on, I'm here, and I know people who are here who contribute positively, who look like me. But this article, it's an opinion article, yes, but it's almost painting me as a black person as I will always. And so if other people...
Yeah. No, it's a racial hierarchy. It's a racial hierarchy. I will never get spoken about as if I am interchangeable with some of the people sending me messages today. Most obviously, I suppose Simon and Ian about banging on about indigenousness or about how people don't mix or integrate. I will never be lumped in with them. There's no sentence in the world that a politician could say that made them and me part of the same problem or part of the same party or part of the same constituency. But what you're describing is a lumping together on an extraordinary, almost industrial scale, and it's not only pointless, it's actually profoundly stupid and hurtful, of course, to you.
Yes, if there's anybody who is integrated, always try to integrate. I do everything. I've joined the military and I've done my stint in there. I go to mainline churches. I try to, in the community, I try to be. But sometimes you go in a place and you try to talk to people so that you can relate with them and that they can know you. But people just blank you because they just see you as that, and they don't want to bring you in so that they can know you. Yeah. Before you go, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the nursing bit. I am a nurse and I love being a nurse, but I recently moved to Coaches and I applied for a job to go back into nursing, but everything within me is saying no because the environment is too toxic for me to go in, and I don't want to go in a place where I'm going to be treated as a nurse who is black, just not as a nurse who's trying to look after me because I'm not well. And if another article that this idea of being black and a nurse in the UK is comes even before after the wars when the Windrush generations were invited, and how being nursing in the UK was being black is what is the racism in there is killing nurses because it's a toxic.
Well, that's where we began.
Where we are never accepted. And if you read an article, another one. Sorry, James, I'm giving you a lot of homework. My daughter doesn't like me giving her homework.
No, I'm here for your homework. Okay.
And the article says nursing while black, why racism is killing nurses. I can't remember who wrote it.
I don't need it. I'll be able to Google the headline. I do have to go to the news now.
So, the politicians should know what they're saying harms people who are actually trying to do good.
I tell you what, I know. Thank you, Keke. I can't believe you thought you were going to need my help getting your points across. I feel that if I don't go to the news now, we may never hear it again, Keke. We may be here long after Sheila Fogarty's arrival in the studio, and I mean that as a compliment. I could listen to you all day. Here's Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:36. The American Vice President J.D. Vance, as Donald Trump visits Saudi Arabia, has just delivered a blistering speech condemning the Saudi administration not only for its for its involvement in the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, but also for the routine practice of sentencing people to the death penalty for their social media. No, of course he hasn't. Don't be ridiculous. It's the UK that has a problem with freedom of speech, according to J.D. Vance. But Donald Trump is indeed in Saudi Arabia. I've got a little quiz for you. What do you think the Saudis did in order to make Donald Trump feel particularly welcome? Did they install a golden tap in his hotel room that dispenses unlimited amounts of Diet Coke, which is his favourite drink? Did they install a golden tap in his hotel room that dispenses unlimited amounts of Diet Coke? Did they set up a portable McDonald's to follow him around the country on his tour so that he could have McDonald's whenever he wanted? Or did they promise to give him a plane that was even bigger and more opulent than the one he is desperate to accept from the Qatari royal family? So did Donald Trump, architect, of course, of the Muslim ban in America on the occasion of his first presidential term, did he receive from his hosts in Saudi Arabia, who, of course, routinely impose the death penalty for social media posts and were involved in the state-sanctioned murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, did he receive a golden tap in his hotel room from which Diet Coke can be dispensed ad infinitum, a portable branch of McDonald's with an engine and on wheels that will follow the Mango Mussolini wherever he may wander, or an aeroplane even bigger and more opulent than the one that the Qatari royal family have promised to give him? I shall give you the answer to that shortly. Well, I'll try to, because I very rarely remember. But the answer to my original question, the first one that I said, do you remember what that question was? So I sound apparently like David Brent, boasting about how many CDs he's sold, that's really taken the gloss off my boast, actually. I was really looking forward. Who sent me that message? Was it David? Someone called David. I was really looking forward to telling you the answer to that hook and tease. Because I'm proud of it. You can laugh at me if you want. I'm proud of it. But now you've compared me to David Brent talking about how many CDs he's sold, and I'm going to feel like a right old Wally when I tell you how many. Saying it's 10 million, which I think is quite a lot. It sounds like a lot. The podcast department tell me that it's a lot. It's a lot more than David Brent sold in CDs. So 10 million downloads of the Full Disclosure podcast. I got a couple in the bag, in the tank. I sat down with Jimmy Anderson yesterday, the fast bowler. And I might as well have been wearing short trousers and a maroon blazer. I was just a little schoolboy again. And I know I wasn't at school when he was in his pomp, but there's something about sporting legends. For me, particularly cricketers, actually. But there's something about sporting legends that just brings out the inner schoolboy. It was such a lovely man as well. He really was. So that one is on the way. Christiane Amanpour, I did 2 yesterday. I almost like having a proper job. That was an incredible conversation about a lot of the political toing and froing at the moment. And there are more of which I shall bring you up to speed shortly, because we're going to go crashing through that 10 million mark. Speaking of political shenanigans, I don't know whether I care or not. I mean, maybe I do. For the good of our country, Nigel Farage must never be Prime Minister. Who said that earlier today? Was it A, Keir Starmer? Was it B, Kemi Badenoch? Or was it C, former Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe? Henry Riley's here to tell us the answer.
It could have been any, couldn't it? But no, it was Rupert Lowe, James, who of course was one of the 5 elected Reform UK MPs back at last year's election. He's the MP for Great Yarmouth, and then a couple of months ago there was this big sort of bust up with the leadership of the party. Now we have from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, that they have reviewed the evidence in sort of light of some threats that were made, or that Reform UK said were made against their chairman, Zia Youssef, and they have concluded they will not be pursuing criminal charges. Now, there were 2 parts of this, James, if you cast your mind back.
Must I?
Yes, well, let me help you.
Thank you.
So firstly, Reform UK said that Rupert Lowe had made effectively threats, very serious threats against Zia Youssef. What we have here is the CPS saying that with relation to this, no criminal charges should be brought. But there is a second part of this, which is not involving involving law enforcement. The parliamentary watchdog are also looking into allegations of bullying. So Rupert Lowe today can certainly clearly hear, and he's making that point in a very lengthy statement, saying that there has been no evidence of criminality and that he's claiming victory. But there is, of course, this parliamentary probe going on. And the statement, James, you took one line of it earlier on. Nigel Farage must never be Prime Minister. I mean, it's
for the good of our country, Henry.
For the good of our country. And it's scathing. I mean, one other part here. He says, with real power, I fear he would wield a immense responsibility to crush dissent. He said at one point as well, he is a coward and a viper. He's ashamed to have called them friends. Nigel Farage is no leader. I'm ashamed to have shared a parliamentary platform with them. But where perhaps you might slightly differ with him, James, is he's saying that he has been, all of this is because of his frank rhetoric and standing firm on wanting to deport illegal immigrants. But
he also gave an interview to the Daily Mail in which he was critical of the leader, didn't he, of Farage? That seemed to be the starting point for a lot of this.
Yeah, and that's certainly the context here. Reform say that actually they'd made this decision before, but there was a suggestion that this might have perhaps sped it up. He actually said at one point, he compared Nigel Farage to a messiah, I think, effectively, and said that perhaps for the good of the party...
Messiah. He's a very naughty
boy.
You have to say that. It's a rule on the radio. It's a rule. If you don't say that, you get thrown out of the studio. Carry on, Henry.
Well, and of course, the added context to this at the time, James, as you'll remember, is you had Elon Musk sort of noises off about Nigel Farage as well, and thinking that Rupert Lowe could be a better leader. So, in a nutshell, it's not quite finished because we still have the parliamentary probe into allegations of bullying against 2 female members of staff, but on the threats against Zia Youssef, the party chairman, the Crown Prosecution Service have found there will be no criminal charges brought.
Any comment from him? This doesn't necessarily make him a liar, but it certainly makes his allegations weaker, look a lot weaker.
I've actually heard nothing from Zia Youssef so far.
Okay.
Quickly check my phone, see if he puts anything out on social media.
This is live in the studio. Henry Riley checking his phone.
Yes, but no, as far as I'm aware, Reform UK have not put out a statement, and no, they have not.
There is some pretty strong stuff there. Smearing my innocent staff in a pathetic attempt to attack me was disgusting, alongside briefings to journalists from senior Reform figures suggesting I had dementia. The lowest, vilest tactics I have seen in my 67 years. They are not fit to lead. They are not fit to be MPs. I mean, he attacks all of them, not just the leader. Is there any case for wondering why he didn't notice any of this before he stood for Parliament under the Reform UK banner?
Well, what's interesting is...
a lot of people could have told him.
Well, what's interesting with Rupert Lowe is, it's not like he's sort of new to the party in the sense that he was a Brexit Party MEP, if you cast your mind back, with Nigel Farage.
I had managed to forget that, Henry.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm thank you for the reminder.
Bad memories.
So he's been on the ticket for years.
He's been on the ticket for years.
He's known Farage for years.
He's known Nigel Farage for years. Richard Tice, of course, was an MEP at the same time, and Widdicombe was. So he knows these sorts of same figures. Perhaps he didn't know Zia Youssef, who wasn't involved with the party at the time. But he's obviously had a career in football as well. He was the chairman of Southampton. So he's newish to politics, but nonetheless, he's been around a while. And James, I know one of your favourite subjects are these new political parties that might pop up.
Oh, another one.
There is a strong hint here, I think.
Excellent.
He says, you'll be hearing a lot more from me very soon. There had been all sorts of sort of allegations, or not even allegations, there'd be all sorts of sort of musings that he may well start a new political party. If I was to put money on it, I suggest that may well be the case.
What will he call it? Is the one that was set up by the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis, is that free now? Is it, or is that still going?
It's still registered.
It is. Oh, so we can't. What was that one called?
Reclaim Party.
So he can't have Reclaim. He can't have Reform. Could he have Revive?
Well, the one potential option...
Reverb's got a nice... Speaking of Reverb... So, carry on.
Yeah. I know you're going with that. but lastly, on the politics, what was quite interesting... I covered the Runcorn and Helsby by-election.
Of course you did.
The English Democrat candidate, Catherine Blakelock, founded Reform UK with Nigel Farage and then was kicked out. But there was some suggestion Rupert Lowe was sort of, although he denies it, he was going to support the English Democrats. So he could well latch onto them, or he could start a new party.
And there is beef there between the woman who founded Reform UK and the man who currently leads it.
Yes, absolutely. And they've fallen out, and they claim it was over anti-Islam tweets from Reform UK, but she points out that other people have not been suspended for saying remarks that perhaps similar.
I mean, his party management makes Jeremy Corbyn look like Mao Zedong, doesn't it? But none of them won't touch the sides of the people minded most to support him. Now, speaking of Reverb, who did you bump into on the tube this morning?
Well, it was actually yesterday, but
Sorry.
this is big news for me.
Yes.
I was on the Piccadilly line and I bumped into Mike Rutherford of
Genesis and Mike and the Mechanics.
Yes, Genesis, and it was a.
Were you looking back over your shoulder on the platform?
Do you know, I put it out on social media and everyone said I should have made that joke, and it was staring me in the face, and I didn't. But
I don't know if he would have appreciated it.
But I did say to you this morning, there's sort of handful of people, probably you and my dad, who would have appreciated how much this, because I've spoken to you a lot about Genesis, how much this would have meant. But it was a very nice moment, actually.
It was lovely to see your joy, your undiluted joy, and I suspect Mike Rutherford was probably delighted that such a young whippersnapper was so knowledgeable and enthusiastic about his band and meeting him.
And he asked me a lot of questions. I did say to you that he was sort of saying, what gigs have you seen? But I said to you before, I'd noticed him about 4 or 5 stops before by the time I was at Knightsbridge. And so I thought, I'm not going to say anything yet, because the worst thing is a sort of awkward 5 minutes between us.
It can be awkward, yes, those sort of scenarios. Thank you, Henry Riley, lovely stuff. Regurgitate? Revolt.
I'll suggest it.
Yeah, if you would, when you speak to them. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Stop sending me suggestions on the possible name of a new party. Henry's just checked the register of parties, actually, and the GB People's Party was actually registered relatively recently, so that might be one to watch. A lot of you going with Repulse or Regurgitate or even Reflux, but I guess Rexit's got a certain ring to it. For people who've left Reform, we could call it Rexit. That's got... Anyway, PMQs on the way imminently. Lucy Easthope and Neil Basu joining me after PMQs to discuss, well, whatever you want, really, but chiefly the books that they have both recently published. Before that, we continue the rather, what would the word be, poignant collection of responses to Keir Starmer's speech this week. Yesterday, it was our turn to work out who he was talking to, or trying to talk to. And today, it's who he's talking about. And the people who have called me are mostly saying me. He's talking about me, whether he meant to or not. It feels like he is. And of course, in conversations about immigration, feelings, if you like, are always more important than facts. But the facts of the matter are that Keir Starmer has made an awful lot of people feel personally targeted. William, I don't think you are one of them. I don't know. I don't think you're one of the people answering who's he talking about me.
I'm not. I'm retired in my 70s, in my golden years, as I make relevant link for you. So, I'm absolutely disgusted by what we call in Scotland Sir Keir Starmer.
Go on.
Basically parroting the Reflux Party, if you want to call them. I think it's awful. It shattered what little faith I had left in UK Labour.
Would I be churlish to suggest that you didn't really have any in the first place? Because are you an SNP man?
I am becoming less so. I'm becoming more of a Green man, to be honest.
Are you really? But it's not easy being Green, William.
I know, but...
No, I have to be slightly careful, because I'm not as obviously as plugged into Scottish politics as I am into Westminster politics, and I do find quite often an opportunity to criticise Keir Starmer is taken up with a lot of alacrity from people in Dunfermline and elsewhere. So I always want to clarify whether or not he has actually lost your support, or whether in fact you're kind of revelling in his disaster. Do you see what I mean? I hope that's not an unfair.
Yeah, no, I'm not revelling in its disaster. I was hopeful that, the one thing I was really pleased about was that England got rid of the Tories.
Yes, fair enough.
That had to be done.
Why is Scotland so different in this field? I mean, Farage's outfit are actually doing all right up there, but they don't seem likely to upset any particular apple carts in the way that they might in Wales or in the rest of the UK. Why does Scotland have such a measurably and historically different attitude to migration into almost identical contexts and environments compared to England?
I don't know. I think we're a more accepting society. I mean, the fact
Why?
In Scotland, I don't know. I think it's because the fact that everything in Scotland is deep fried comes from all the Italian chippies.
You can't. I'm going to demand a slightly more serious answer to the question. Is it? Someone suggested to me earlier this week, and it stayed with me actually, that you don't need. You don't. It doesn't. It's not as popular a pastime to blame immigrants for everything that's wrong in Scotland, because you can just blame the English.
Maybe, yeah, there's some proof in that.
Yes, go on.
We invented the chicken tikka masala in Glasgow.
Yeah.
We've always had loads of Italians who do all of our pizzas and ice creams and chippies. So I think it's just we're all Jock Thompson's bairns up here.
Well, it's an answer. It doesn't go all the way, but maybe no answer does. In terms of a lot of the things that you'd cite as part of Scotland's immigrant legacy would also apply to England, and yet you don't seem to have anything like the levels of toxicity that we do. 11:55 is the time. Thank you, William. Darren is in Liverpool. Darren, what made you pick up the phone?
It's about this narrative. Hi, by the way, first-time caller. My mind goes blanks.
Oh, no, all right, don't worry, I've got you.
First of all, commiserations to Kidderminster on the defeat by Chester. I'm a big Marine FC fan, so I'll see you in the National League.
See you next season, mate. It's a schlep to Marine, I tell you. I nearly did it this season, but I couldn't quite justify. I made the trip to Southport. Which was 8 hours of my life I'll never get back. But Marine is quite a journey. Anyway, we digress. And you were worried about your mind going blank. Talk to me about this narrative.
You had a red card, and you got beat 3-1.
I know,
I was there. Right, so, yeah, it's about this narrative around immigration, always asking, what do they want to take, not what they offer. I'm married to an Ecuadorian.
Okay.
I'm British national, obviously. And when I first met her around 15 years ago, I think it was, a lot of, it's a long time ago, a lot of the narrative then was like she's just after a green card.
Really?
That kind of attitude. Not what can she give us? And it got to the point, really, that they said to her, if you love her that much, why don't you move to our country? So I did. For 10 years.
Gosh.
Now, the other thing is I'm actually a qualified physics teacher. So the country lost a very kind of, a shortage subject.
Yeah, very much so.
In me.
What was it like when you got to Ecuador? Did people think you were on the take?
Well, no. People were all trying to impress me with their English language skills.
You've made me think that Starmer possibly is... One thing you might take away from this whole hour is the idea that it's so baked in, the attitudes you describe, the tribalism that Daniel Finkelstein writes about in the Times today, the sense of never being able to do enough to prove that you belong, or it's so baked into so much of the population that Starmer's just sort of waved a white flag, if you pardon the pun, and decided to legislate for the world that we live in rather than the world that you and me would like to live in, and we used to think Starmer would prefer to live in as well. Maybe we got that wrong, but that's why the word inevitability has popped up a lot today, which surprises me.
Yeah, it has. My wife does have a lot to kind of offer this country. We've moved back here now. We did that a couple of years ago. That was a very difficult situation because it happened at the same time as the Ukraine war kicked off. So our visa application for her, I was living here. I had to return, meet the financial requirements, etc. And then right as we were putting in our application, the Ukraine refugee scheme pushed all of us to the back of the queue. So we were actually separated as a family for about a year and a half before she could join us.
I think a lot of people massively misunderestimate how much control there already is, and that's partly due to the post-Ukraine numbers, partly due to those extraordinary figures that came about as a consequence of massive changes in Ukraine, in Hong Kong, to a lesser extent in Afghanistan, and of course in the UK, and that the European mobile workforce that was once so welcome suddenly wasn't, and so we had to try to tempt people from much further afield for much longer, and therefore much more likely to bring dependents with them, all of which was perfectly natural and of course rendered inevitable, but which was politically toxic. The idea that it's just really, really easy is incredible. If it was really, really easy, nobody would risk their life getting into a small boat, but this point is rarely made. Thank you, Darren. Natasha Clark is here. Welcome to tell us I've got no idea where we might go today, because in some ways Starmer John Crace puts it quite well in The Guardian today. People on the left think that he's the new Enoch Powell, and people on the right think he hasn't gone far enough. Where does that leave Kemi Badenoch?
Yeah, well, it's exactly where I thought the Prime Ministers might go today, because Prime Minister's questions because exactly you've got the really interesting position of Keir Starmer finding himself squeezed from all sides, and we have a question from Nigel Farage today, who I'm sure will be, interested to see Keir Starmer's reaction from both sides of this, really, because like you say, you will get MPs on the left of the Labour Party who are really unhappy with some of the language that Keir Starmer used earlier this week, talking about making us an island of strangers and the impact of migration, and saying that he's going too far. But on the other side, you're going to have people like Nigel Farage, like others in other parties, including Kemi Badenoch. And one option for her is to attach herself to that, to sort of try and curb off the reform wing of her party.
So I'm glad the Prime Minister now agrees with me.
Exactly. This is
But she's certainly got the ego to try.
Well, she has done this before, hasn't she? Where she said Keir Starmer has changed his position based on what I've said. Interesting tactics.
It would take some front on this occasion, wouldn't it? But she's got plenty.
I'm told, however, one source said that they think that Kemi Badenoch will talk about unemployment and changes to the data, which was this week is out and pointing to a bit of a slowdown in the economy. She has gone on those topics before. Data showing a drop in job vacancies, pay growth is down. There's been a decline slightly in payroll jobs, and unemployment reaching a now 4-year high. So that could be something that we'll touch on. Ed Davey, which I think we should start talking about.
I think you're absolutely right. Well remembered.
Gaza and US trade deal have been some of his topics that he's raised repeatedly at Prime Minister's questions. So I'd be surprised if, seeing the developments in Gaza and that Israeli strike in the last few days, that he might mention that. And of course, the US trade deal announced last Thursday, I believe. This is the first Prime Minister's questions. Will he again try to press the Prime Minister on getting that vote on the US trade agreement that he's so been seeking recently?
Why is he proving so successful at carving out? I don't want to say relevance, because it would make it sound like previous Lib Dem leaders or even SNP leaders hadn't been relevant. But he's carving out some new territory at PMQs that we haven't seen from the third party leader for a while.
I think it's because of the fact that Labour are now in government. This used to be occupied ground for Labour, and especially under previous leaders, including Jeremy Corbyn, more towards the left. These are issues that are now, no other party can really go on. And obviously he's got such a high-profile position to have questions at Prime Minister's questions in this way, now that the SNP are not occupying that ground anymore. So I think that's basically why I'd say that, things like this, it's not something that Keir Starmer's going to be mentioning. It's not something that Kemi Badenoch's going to be talking about. The whole left-wing sort of centrist ground is up for taking.
Yes, there's no doubting that. Could the Lib Dems enjoy a surge? I mean, they did very well at the last general election. They could be picking a very senior Labour member who is very unhappy with what Keir Starmer said on Monday. The words, more than the detail necessarily of the paper, told me that we should be more worried about the Lib Dems and the Greens, because trying to go after let the right wing fight over the people who are obsessed with immigration, and we should be offering everybody else in the country something that they find attractive. Could the Lib Dems be on the brink of something special? Yeah,
I mean, last year in the election they did incredibly well. Not quite as well in the local elections as I think maybe some were expecting, so they've maybe not made so many grounds there, and I think the Green Party did a little bit better.
Oh, hang on, here he is. Oh, well done. Here she is.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, Sir Roy Stone served 13 chief whips and prime ministers from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson, and I'd like to pay tribute to his extraordinary service and send my best wishes to his family. And also, before we start, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say to the Prime Minister how horrified I was to hear about the attack on his family home. It is completely unacceptable. And I think I speak for the whole House when I say that this wasn't just an attack on him, but on all of us and on our democracy. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment is up 10% since the election. Why does the Prime Minister think unemployment is rising on his watch?
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Roy Stone as well, and the service that was given us in various capacities. Can I thank her for her words about the attacks on me and my family, and the kind messages from many others in the last few days. She did actually message me pretty well straight away, And I really do appreciate that. And she's absolutely right that this is an attack on all of us, on democracy and the values that we stand for. Mr. Speaker, she comes here every week to talk the country down. We've got 200,000 new jobs, record investment, 4 interest rates cut. Contrast that to the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, inflation through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole.
I'm not sure the Prime Minister even knew that unemployment was up, but there's no point him blaming everyone else. The fact is, Conservatives reduced the deficit every year until the pandemic, more than doubled the personal allowance. We left 4 million extra jobs, tackled the post-pandemic inflation spike, and left the fastest-growing economy in the G7. Let's talk about what is happening today. Let's look at Beales, a 180-year-old department store in Dorset. They survived 2 world wars and the winter of discontent, but they couldn't survive this Labour government. Beales is having, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, a Rachel Reeves closing down sale. What does the Prime Minister have to say to all the people who have lost their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses, but she must be the only person left in the country who thinks the economy was booming after the last government. We've created new jobs, record investment, trade deals that they tried. The India deal, I think they tried for 8 years and failed. We did that deal. They talked about a US deal. We did that deal. We tend to get a stronger relationship with the EU. The former trade minister must be the only former trade minister who's against all trade deals which boost our economy. She says she's against the India deal, even though it's got the same provisions she put on the table. She's against the US deal, even though it saves thousands of jobs in car manufacturing. And Mr. Speaker, most absurdly, she says she's going to rip up the EU deal when she hasn't even seen what's on the page. They're reduced to a brain rot. A once great political party is sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome his tiny tariff deal, but the fact is, it has put us in a worse position than we were in March. He should not over-egg the pudding. Let's talk about how things are getting worse now. In every month of this year, household names like Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, and Santander have cut staff. The ONS estimates that there are 100,000 fewer jobs than a year ago. And this was before his jobs tax, which will make things worse. Can the Prime Minister promise the House that by this time next year, unemployment will be lower than it is today?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think she just said a tiny tariff deal. Can I suggest that she gets the train to Solihull? Yes, exactly. 2 hours, goes to speak to the workforce at JLR, their families, and their communities, to tell them she would rip up the deal that protects their jobs. And when she's done that, she might travel across to Scunthorpe and tell the steelworkers there she's going to rip up the deal that saves their jobs. And then if she's got time, go up to Scotland and talk to the whisky distilleries. Tell them she'd rip up the deal that's creating 1,200 jobs for them, boosting their exports, and then come back here next week and tell us what reaction she got.
So I didn't hear a promise to get unemployment down, and that's because he knows things are going to get worse. And this goes wider than businesses. Last week, I met staff and patients at Farley Hospice. They do fantastic work, but they need to find an additional £250,000 to pay the jobs tax. How does he suggest Farley Hospice, a charity which relies on donations, pays for his tax hike?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have provided £100 million boosting for the sector, and Children and Young Person Hospitals received £26 million funding this year. But, Mr. Speaker, she turns up every week to cart from the sidelines. But what she doesn't do, she moans about what we had to do in the budget to stabilise the economy. But she hasn't got the courage to stand there and say that she would reverse the next decisions that we take. And I know why. It's because she doesn't want to say she's against the £26 billion investment in our NHS. She doesn't want to say she's against the £1.2 billion more for our police. She doesn't want to say she's against the £3.2 billion more for our schools. All the time she doesn't have the courage of her convictions. It shows that her criticism is totally confected.
Mr. Speaker, I can't believe the Prime Minister is still using this figure. We had this very conversation at the dispatch box. He knows it is just capital spending. It's either he's not paying attention or he is saying things to disguise what is going on. That money will not pay for the jobs tax. He knows that, and the hospices know it too. And the other people who know that things are getting worse are the 5 leading business groups in the UK. They say that his so-called employment rights bill will be deeply damaging to growth. Yes. Does the Prime Minister accept that they are right, or does he believe that he knows better than business?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Tories. Every time better rights for workers are on the table, they vote against them. Respect and dignity and protection at work are good for workers, good for the economy, and good for growth.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to listen to business. You cannot have employment rights without employment. Labour always forgets that it is not government that creates growth, it is business that creates growth. And businesses are closing, and they are blaming him and his Chancellor. There are 100,000 fewer jobs, Mr. Speaker. Hospices, charities, nurseries, they are facing bills from the jobs tax that they cannot afford. Even the unions say workers are being thrown on the scrap heap. And all of this before his unemployment bill makes hiring even more expensive. When will he admit that Labour isn't working?
Mr. Speaker, she says we should listen to She should listen to business.
I will have the last... Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she should listen to business. They're in favour of our trade deals. The India deal, fantastic deal. Tariffs on cars cut to 10%. Whiskey and gin, tariffs halved. £4.8 billion into our economy. What does she say she'd do with the India deal? She wants to rip it up. The US deal that saves thousands upon thousands of jobs. What does she want to do? She wants to rip it up. The EU deal, good for our economy. She's not going to even wait to see what it says. She absurdly says she's going to rip it up. It is so unserious. She even was reduced last week to calling the Indian government, accusing them of fake news. No wonder she did so badly as a trade secretary. Mr. Speaker, the project for them is over. They're sliding into oblivion. They're a dead party walking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of British jobs have been safeguarded by this government's trade agreement with the US. Including those in my constituency who work for Jaguar Land Rover, like my next-door neighbour Ollie, proving that when Labour negotiates, workers win. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me that he will continue to stand up for all workers and our vital motor manufacturing industry as he negotiates a better deal for Britain around the world?
Well, can I pay tribute to her for her work with JLR, standing up for the jobs in her constituency? The deal that we've agreed saves thousands of jobs in our car industry, securing the livelihoods of countless families. And Mr. Speaker, I've been up to JLR on a number of occasions, including last week. I know firsthand what it means for their workforce, for their families and for their communities. And the Leader of the Opposition says she would go and tell them she's going to rip it up. She should go up there. She says she's going to get against it. The Reform leader said, what did he say about JLR? He said JLR deserves to go bust. Shame on him. Labour are striking deals in the national interest.
The Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, can I offer heartfelt congratulations to His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV? And can I offer our support to the Prime Minister and his family after the appalling arson attacks on his home? And can I echo his thanks to our brilliant police and firefighters? Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, the previous government was faced with a choice. Their own Migration Advisory Committee told ministers that recruiting more care workers required improved conditions, career progression and better pay. But the Conservatives chose not to do that. That's not true, and instead brought in large numbers of care workers from overseas. Now, those carers looking after our loved ones in care homes should be thanked, not demonised. But will the Prime Minister do now the things the Conservatives refused to do, starting with a higher minimum wage for carers?
Prime Minister. Can I first thank him for his comments about myself and my family? I do really appreciate it. It is important that we have fair pay for care workers, and that's why we've put in place our fair pay agreements. This is the first of its type. It will be applied first to care workers to ensure that they get fair pay, but also a better framework for progression. As he will know, most people leaving care work are leaving care work to go to the NHS because of the pay and the ability to progress. Our fair pay agreements will deal with that to make sure that in the future those jobs are more secure. And I would just add, Mr. Speaker, a declaration of interest. My sister is a care worker. I know firsthand how important the work is and how difficult sometimes the situation is facing them.
Shred Davey. For that reply, it's a good first step, but we'll still be seeing people earning more in Amazon warehouses and supermarkets than care homes, and that will mean our loved ones going without the care that they need. But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, for more than 10 weeks, Israeli forces have blocked food, water and medicine getting into Gaza. There is now a humanitarian catastrophe with 2 million people at risk of famine and 1 in 5 facing starvation. Rather than ending this crisis, the Netanyahu government is planning to seize all Gaza indefinitely. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the blockade to Gaza should end, and I'm sure he would agree that it would be appalling if Netanyahu proceeds with that escalation. But will he act now and pick up the phone to President Trump for a joint plan to recognise Palestine and get food, water and medicine into Gaza?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising this because the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable and getting worse. And we are working with other leaders urgently to bring about rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed, obviously alongside the release of hostages, and to get back to a ceasefire, and that work is going on through my team 24/7. I do believe that is the initial action that needs to be taken, but I still fundamentally believe that however remote it may seem at the moment, the pathway to a two-state solution is the only way for settled and lasting peace in the Middle East, and we will continue with our allies to pursue that path.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Found in my constituency.
16 minutes after 12. I think that Kemi Badenoch may have just committed another rather large gaffe of the kind that she has repeatedly insisted she never ever makes. You don't need to know much about department stores to know when one is open and when one is... Well, I'll tell you more after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:19 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What was the name of that department store in Poole that she claimed was closing down as a consequence of Rachel Reeves's policies? Beals. Well, it's not part of the 23 branch empire of department stores that went into administration in January of 2020 when, of course, the Conservatives were in power.
I literally was racking my brains thinking, Beals.
There's one in Diss in Norfolk. I know
that
there's one in Diss and there was one in Diss and there was one in Hexham as well. And then sort of various other Wisbech, quite a few across East Anglia. It's quite a, like a household name, like Owen and Owen was in the Midlands for a long time.
We haven't heard anything about Beals in a while, and why is that?
Because it went into administration in 2020, and then the fella that runs it, who opened one shop in Poole as after the administration was completed. I was just looking at the recent Facebook page because I'm a weirdo. Went into the Poole store last weekend. No wonder it's closing down. Most of the stuff in there was just outdated. I remember visiting the Bournemouth store during the closing down sale and wondered if it was the buyers who were to blame. Another one saying they were a dead duck for years, sadly didn't move with the times. Perhaps if your business cannot survive without paying staff a fair salary, it's no longer viable. Outdated department style farmer. How long did the Bournemouth one close down? It's been circling the drain for years. I guess management is looking to shift the blame. This in response to a Daily Telegraph story from 5 days ago, claiming that a department store was holding a Rachel Reeves closing down sale, but not mentioning, A, that the CEO, whose name is Tony Brown, is a fully paid up member of the Conservative Party, B, that Beales reported a £6 million loss in 2013, closed 10 stores in 2016 and went into complete administration in 2020, or indeed C, that the company that has now reopened 3 stores shortly afterwards, 2 of them shut, and only the one in Poole survived. So how is this all Rachel Reeves' fault?
It's all Rachel Reeves' fault. Well, it's because it's in the Telegraph, so I imagine that's
just
why.
Googled it? They could have just Googled. Do you know what I Googled?
Yeah.
Because Timothy texted me to tell me that he lives in the area. Beales went into administration in 2020, so I thought he can't have got that right. Kemi Badenoch told us she never makes gaffes.
She never makes a gaffe.
She never has to apologise because she never says anything wrong. So I literally just Googled Beales administration and found all of the things that
it didn't even last the pandemic. Didn't even go into the pandemic. But yes, that's a pretty big one, isn't it? And just really raises the question, who are these people in Tory head office? Have they fired everybody, including their research department? They really need to be getting this stuff right. It's pretty basic stuff, and it's obviously a very hot topic. It's a good topic to go on. There are lots of reasons why I think people feel that the economy isn't doing as well as it could do, and it's a good topic to go on. But if she can't get basic facts right about this, then that really puts her in a really poor position. So it's not fantastic to, the whole closing down sale works very well as a joke, but if it's not backed up by any sort of action, then what's the point?
Another example of her being terminally online? As I'm not on Twitter anymore.
No, it's terminally in the Telegraph. It's just she needs to be reading more than just the Telegraph, doesn't she?
I guess, but it would probably have been picked up on Twitter and salivated over by...
I don't think I've ever been to Beales. So sorry to say. That's just a sign of the times. I mean, it's not Woolworths. No Woolworths, is it? But,
Pretty clear she hasn't either.
Sure. But yeah, that's pretty bad. I think a pretty flat performance from her today, would you not say?
Well, I
didn't really fail to land a lot of blows there. Lots of facts. She kept throwing off facts and, this and that, unemployment rates, wage growth, all of this stuff that we talked about at the beginning, but didn't really feel that the emotion really landed there. And I think that's what she was hoping that the Beales anecdote was going to do, but it didn't. So I don't think that was a fantastic.
It's now being bombarded with tales of Beales closing down up and down. 22 of them shut down in 2020. So people have got an awful lot.
We've got good memories,
evidence.
Guys.
I think Debenhams went bust under the Tories as well. But hey ho,
let's not let facts get in the way of a good slamming of the government.
Shall we listen to Liz Saville-Roberts briefly, the leader of Plaid Cymru in Westminster, putting a question to the Prime Minister?
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Cyfarwydd. This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker, I want to lead a country where we pull together and walk into the future as neighbours and as communities, not as strangers. And the loss of control of migration by the last government put all of that at risk. And that's why we're fixing the system based on principles of control, selection and fairness.
Lightning quick response from Keir Starmer there.
Rude.
Yeah, but sure. It was also rude when he accused the Tories of sliding into brain-dead oblivion.
Yes,
but, Starmer's getting a bit spikier up here.
I thought that was worth playing out because we heard his attempt at an attempt. We heard his sort of defence of the rhetoric that he was deploying earlier in the week, which has caused such upset, of course, on his own benches. Farage has also been on his feet, trying to shift attention back to the small boats crossings. But what was interesting was that the rhetoric that Keir Starmer unveiled on Monday with regard to immigration, if not the policies, was something Kemi Badenoch felt she couldn't go near.
Yeah, and why does she feel that does she not want to open up that discussion on it? Because again, she like Keir Starmer, is getting completely squeezed. And there are people within the Conservative Party that feel like you were talking about before we went to Prime Minister's questions about the Liberal Democrats and the seats in the south of England, that the Liberal Democrats have been snapping at the heels of the Tory Party and the Labour Party on now for a long time. Kemi Badenoch's in exactly the same position because she's being squeezed by two parts of the political spectrum. On one hand, Nigel Farage and Reform, which of course doing very well in the polls. You cannot ignore it. You also can't ignore, the polling which says that lots of Brits, lots of voters do want governments and political parties to do more on immigration. You can't ignore it. But actually, Keir Starmer, and we might hear some more from Keir Starmer next week because actually we've got this big EU summit, Ursula von der Leyen and other political leaders from around Europe flying into London for a big political summit on Monday. And I wonder whether the language around migration might start to change. You'd like to think that if you were Keir Starmer about to announce potential under-30s mobility deal, you might start to be talking up the benefits of migration as well. But also that makes me think...
Can he pivot at all? I think he probably can. We're still a long way out from an election.
I think that's why he decided to make this speech this week, because he might be preparing to announce some sort of deal next week, and therefore he'll be saying, well, I will crack down on some forms of migration in order to allow under-30s to have this sort of mobility migration deal. So he can have both his cake and eat it too, essentially. I think that's why he's done it and framed it in this way. But yeah, it's he's clearly trying to defend it, trying to get on both sides of it. But the loss of control of migration by the last government is something that Kemi Badenoch just can't come back to, can she?
No, and nor can she really get much traction on trade deals because, she didn't sign any.
I'm sorry, but actually that's mad, isn't it? I know your feelings very strongly on these trade deals.
Yes.
And, she's now completely flipping on that and saying, it's a tiny, tiny tariff trade deal. Why are you bothering? Well, why did you bother signing all of these memorandums?
She announced things that didn't actually change anything.
Yeah,
and Starmer has improved the situation we were in before he signed it,
exactly.
Albeit that because Donald Trump is Donald Trump, it leaves him in a situation worse than the one he was in under Joe Biden.
And I will always defend the idea of these memorandum of understanding traders, whatever. Yeah, because I think it's better than nothing.
I think I'll fight you on that one.
So you think that this trade deal that the Keir Starmer has
it's got numbers
signed
in it.
Has got something. I just think it's
got numbers in it. A tariff was X and now it's X minus Y.
Exactly. So it's worth doing. It's better than nothing.
But the Badenoch stuff was just we promised to be nice to each other in the future.
Yeah, true.
Yes,
but I still think it's worth having those. No, I think so. It might not be shifting the economy by 2, 3, 4% or whatever. But I do think that it's better to have these memorandums of understanding, these mini trailers are better than absolutely nothing at all, and having these relationships is a good thing. But I agree that the Conservatives have talked them up to be far more than they actually are. And this Labour government, of course, is talking this trade deal up to be far more than it is. It's a carve-out of some specific trade tariffs. It's not going to have a huge impact on our economy. And we are still looking at tariffs hitting the economy to the tune of potentially tens of millions of pounds.
And India is, by any measure, a win for the United
definitely.
Kingdom.
And again, something that the Tories tried to get over the line for years and
they could have shared the credit. She could have said, "I'm delighted to see him picking up the pieces of what we had worked so hard." That would have been a much wiser way to do it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Instead, he's done a lap of honour and she's on the side of the track throwing rotten tomatoes.
Exactly, and I think it worked. That's something that will work for both parties because he can say, "Well, actually, yes, we picked up your trade deal and we did what you couldn't do." So it does work for both parties, and you can have that fight about who it was that got that trade deal over the line. But I think it's worth having one.
And then Brexit. I know we don't bring it up very often on this programme, but Brexit was all about being able to sign trade deals with people like India. Keir Starmer didn't want to do blooming Brexit. Kemi Badenoch did, and now they've done a trade deal with India, and she's poo-pooing it, and he's celebrating it.
The tables have turned.
Everything's gone bonkers,
it has,
hasn't it? And speaking of bonkers, some people listening on catch-up without realising it, like Pete, who's been in touch to tell me, Kemi Badenoch has forgotten that Beales went into administration in January 2020 and closed 22 of its 23 stores that March. It later reopened under new owners with 3 stores, 2 of them quickly shut, and now the final one is shutting in Poole at the end of this month. But the Conservative Party member who runs the company has told the Daily Telegraph it was all Rachel Reeves' fault, and without doing any research whatsoever, or indeed running it by her top team and closest aides, Kemi Badenoch has just repeated that nonsense on the floor of the House of Commons.
Not great.
Davey was good.
Davey was good, yeah, and again, without blowing our own trumpets, exactly the topics that we thought he was going to go on, Gaza and care workers as well, which we neglected to mention. It's not my trumpet,
Natasha, it was entirely yours.
Entirely my trumpet. And also, just to bring you what Nigel Farage has been talking about in the last few minutes, he says, we at Reform enjoyed your speech and urge him to go even further than he did on Monday, which, again, feeds into this idea of the Prime Minister being squeezed on both sides.
It's not. It's been etiolated on both sides or stretched because the left are saying you've gone too far and the right are saying you haven't gone far enough. So am I going completely doolally? Or does that create quite a big space?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe
in the middle. I'm not as extreme as you. And I'm not as extreme as you. So he is the ultimate centrist.
Yeah, so he should be defending this position and saying, actually, I'm going to what the British people want to hear, which is more controls on migration, but I will not be going as far as those guys.
And that's why the use of the word squalid, which a lot of my favourite commentators have picked up on, even more than the use of the word strangers, which is more nuanced. And although Enoch Powell used the words, he wasn't using them in the same context that Keir Starmer was. It's the use of the word squalid that has upset people so much. Great stuff. Thank you. It is 12:31. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Neil Basu will join me next, the former Assistant Commissioner of the Met Police and author of a new book about his 30 years of policing, politics and prejudice, to give the subtitle of the book Turmoil its full ticket. I have quite a few other things that have popped up recently. I'll be interested to hear what Neil has to say, so don't go anywhere. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. You're listening. I haven't forgotten. I haven't told you the answer to the quiz of what the Saudis have given Donald Trump upon his arrival. I ran through the three. Is it a golden tap that dispenses unlimited amounts of Diet Coke? Is it a portable branch of McDonald's that follows him around on wheels? Or is it an aeroplane even more vulgar and expensive than the one that the Qatari royal family has promised him? I'll tell you the answer to that after we talk to Neil Basu about his new book, Turmoil, 30 Years of Policing, Politics and Prejudice. Neil, welcome. We spoke at length, actually, on Full Disclosure, as you were, I think, in the middle of writing it or had just delivered it. And given that it's a book that focuses upon, to read out the subtitle, Policing, Politics and Prejudice, I wonder how much the ecosystem has changed, even since finishing the book and publishing it, or agreeing to write it and publishing it, not least because of the conversations that Keir Starmer has started this week. Sadiq Khan here yesterday, very unhappy with some of the language. The idea that racism was recognised and being addressed, although, as you write in the book, nowhere near enough. Is that retreating? I mean, looking at what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, abolishing DEI, people with concerns like yours are being told more than ever to pipe down, I think.
Yeah, well, thanks, James, for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. As ever, pleasure to be with you. I think what you've just said is absolutely true. I've described it previously as I lost the war on woke. The culture war, as soon as Trump came in overseas, I've been predicting since sort of the early days of Brexit, the referendum, and then 2016, the rise of nationalism, xenophobia, Trump's first term, now Trump's second, with his very aggressive attack on diversity, equality and inclusion, which is something which I've talked a great deal about in the last few years and couldn't convince my fellow police chiefs to acknowledge, particularly in terms of institutional racism in policing, where I thought had they acknowledged it and apologised for it and then taken action on it, that story would have gone away within 24 hours and we could have concentrated on what the solutions were. And that's really largely the principal reason for writing this book was there is a business case for being a more effective policing service if you get diversity, equality and inclusion, something that I'm afraid the state seems to have forgotten. And I know policing here hasn't forgotten it because ironically they're doing it. They just won't use the term.
I am utterly complicit in the failings of the Met, the force I adored. You could describe me as both victim and survivor. I never saw myself as a victim, but I am part of the Met's long and troubled history, and therefore I am also a perpetrator. Are you being a bit hard on yourself there? I mean, you might not have succeeded, but you tried your best.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you. I think some of the feedback, particularly from friends, is stop being so hard on yourself. I nearly called the book Shame, because I felt I hadn't done enough. But I think it's very common, as one of my great mentors said to me, as you get close to the end of your career, or if, when you've just finished it like me, you always think there's something you haven't done enough of. And trying to change the dial on representation, diversity, the kind of institutional nature of prejudice that exists in a few police officers. It is not the majority. I've worked with thousands, and I've described this book very much as a love letter to policing, perhaps from an angry lover. That's how I put it. I hadn't, leaving right on the, just before my friend Dame Louise published her Casey report. I've given evidence to the Angelini inquiry. You're looking at some calamitous moments in policing. But of course, I started in the week that Stephen Lawrence was murdered, and I was at the 30-year memorial at his family's invitation 30 years later. So my entire career bookended by that watershed moment. And then speaking out after George Floyd's murder and trying to say, this is the new watershed moment, and feeling that those words had fallen on deaf ears was a terribly depressing moment. And yes, when you're writing a book, this, the catharsis of it means, well, you say what you feel. And unfortunately, I just don't feel I did do enough.
Were you surprised by some of the feelings that came bubbling to the surface while you were looking back and writing about it?
Well, not really. I've been, ever since I wrote that blog on the 28th of May 2020 to my colleagues about George Floyd's murder, I'd been receiving feedback on a regular basis from lots of people that I speak to, some that I mentor and coach, organizations who've asked me to speak on diversity. I've done a great deal of that for the last 5 years, and the feedback has always been the same. And things have not changed enough. And in fact, for a lot of people, they feel that they're regressing. People of my age remember what it felt like in the 70s and 80s. There are people who are now experiencing similar things, and Southport really brought this home, things that they had never expected to experience in their life and were not familiar with, and that's very depressing.
Yeah, it's a theme we've been exploring on the programme today. For people who might respond to some of what you've said by saying you're a thief taker, what you should have, well, you did. I mean, you got an extraordinary record of success in your various jobs, but just explain why you care so much about the other stuff, why you care so much about the politics and prejudice, not just the policing. Because not everybody in the force would, not everybody with a mixed background or with a background like yours would. Plenty of black and ethnic minority officers would not care as much as you do about the other two Ps. They'd care exclusively about the first P. Why do you feel it so keenly?
I feel it keenly because, well, the politics thing, I left the word press out of that because I thought no one will ever cover the book. But I think we have a responsibility as a society to back our police service. Turmoil is partly because I love it so much and I hated leaving it, but I left it perhaps not in the position it should have been. And I stayed even when at times policing hasn't wanted people like me. And if you're black or Asian as a police officer, and I agree fully with what you've just said, I think maybe 50%, and Louise Casey would back this up, did not really understand and were not experiencing the level of prejudice many of my predecessors and my generation would have felt. But if you think 1 in 2 is a success, then that's a bit of a sad reflection on society. When I joined, 100% of black, Asian and female officers would have a story about prejudice. The fact that it's not that percentage anymore, but it's still significant, is not good. And my point about that is if you want to be an effective police service, you have to provide that policing to everybody, not just the people you like. And if you understand that, the purpose of diversity and inclusion, you will understand that gaining the trust and confidence of people who don't currently have confidence in you, and at the moment, you could argue that's the majority of the public, women, girls, LGBTQ plus, black, Asian, if you add them all together, they're probably the majority. But if you get their confidence, you get intelligence, you get evidence, you get people who are willing to help police when they're in trouble. And in order for that to work and to gain that trust and confidence, policing has to be as professional as it can be. The prime responsibility is with them. But you do need politicians and the press to support policing when it's good, as well as criticize them fairly when they're bad. But if we're not going to hear a good news story about policing, we'll all start losing confidence. And that's a very bad day for society.
So it's a simple case of the more people feel represented and respected by the police, the more good the police can do.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to believe we're on their side if they want to help us help them create a safer community. I mean, it's a very clear business case, and this book wasn't written trying to, get on a platform and give a moral case for why diversity and inclusion is important. My view is I'm talking to adults here who ought to understand the difference between right and wrong and treat human beings as human beings. But let's be honest, there is a very clear business case for believing in this as well, if you want to be an effective police officer.
It's interesting, isn't it? As you speak, even though we began by marking the fact that things feel as if they're going backwards, it actually renders your message more urgent and more important. But for people who are more interested in the first P, the policing, and who may not be fully aware of your career, just remind us of some of the, I think I can use the word highlights fairly, or so some of the highlights of your policing, the things you look back on with the most pride.
Well, I mean, one of my greatest sources of pride, and I made my name as a detective working on a unit called Operation Trident back in the late 90s, early noughties, which was dealing with gangland murders, basically, in the black community, largely after the kind of 80s and early 90s epidemic of crack cocaine. A lot of drug dealers claiming territory respect, originally Jamaican Yardies, then second generation young British black boys. And we turned the tide on that back then. And we did it because the black community came to us and asked us to help. And we started policing with the black community instead of against them. And I think it was one of the few occasions in my service post Stephen Lawrence and the Stephen Lawrence inquiry where Trident was given more resources. And we made an absolute effort to try and join hands and partner with the black community to solve one of the biggest problems in London at the time. And if you look at the last 10 years and you look at knife crime and black suspects, black perpetrators, you'll see there's never been a more important time than to have a close partnership with the black community in order to be able to do the kind of policing they require to both protect them, and that's really important as victims of crime, and also to police with them to solve the problem. So Trident, clearly back in those days, is how I made my name as a detective. I worked in kidnap, countering organised crime, but of course I spent 7 years in countering terrorism, and that's having done the 3 consecutive senior jobs in counter-terrorism throughout probably the worst time since the height of the Troubles. That was probably the defining role of my career, and I've never been prouder than to work. I've always said, coincidentally, it's probably the easiest leadership job I ever had because you don't have to motivate counter-terrorism professionals to get out of bed to arrest terrorists.
You certainly hope not. It's interesting the way you mentioned earlier about people who maybe have lost faith in the force. I wonder if that will form part of your answer to this question. LBC has published an investigation today looking at violence directed at all key frontline workers. 43,000 police officers punched, kicked or attacked with weapons in the year under scrutiny, 23-24, which is an increase of 17% on the previous year. What do you think the factors? That's not a coincidence. Something must be changing that empowers people to be to be violent towards police officers. What do you think that might be about?
I think that trend in assaults on police has been increasing for a very long time. I'm wary of statistics. I was trained as an economist, so I know you can invent whatever you like to prove whatever point you want. And they're very good at that. So we have reported a lot more assaults on police than we've ever done in our history. And that was important to demonstrate the fact that our officers were at risk. A lot of things my generation would never have reported now get reported. It's the real violence with injury that you have to look at as the most damning statistic. And it has definitely got more violent. As we kitted up more, as we, equipped ourselves with body armor and ASPs instead of truncheons and quick cuffs instead of the old handcuffs, taser became more prominent. The argument is we've had to respond to being assaulted more by kitting up more. Does that actually give the public more license to be more aggressive towards us, or has society just got more violent and aggressive? I don't know the answer to that. You'll have to get a criminologist on. It feels like society is getting more willing and less deferential to authority and more willing to assault police officers. I think that is a terrible space to be in. But you're right to say that What is going to cause the public to want to help police in those circumstances when they're being attacked? I mean, the worst thing you see these days is people filming it and posting it instead of wading in to help. And that's largely because large sections of the community don't feel that they're on the side of the police or on the side of any kind of authority. And we've seen that happen for decades now. The answer to this is what? Police officers being the most professional they can be and convincing the public that they're on their side and to win back their trust and confidence. Yes, that has to be the number one priority. But again, the rest of us have to start looking at what we require to feel safe when we leave our front door.
Well, it's in that in that territory. My final question sits. I just wonder what your personal reaction was to the news a couple of weeks ago that the Met police officer cleared of murdering Chris Cabba would still face a gross misconduct hearing. I wonder whether it was one of those areas where you felt that the press or the media was rather letting the public down, or whether you had stronger views.
Well, the stronger view is that the whole system's letting that officer down. And in letting that officer down, you're letting down that officer's family, all of his colleagues, policing as a service. But you're also, and I've said this many times, you're letting the family of Chris Cabba down, who weren't responsible for what their son did, wanted justice. And it's almost impossible to understand this situation unless you know something about policing. But the idea that these investigations, inquiries, that there are at least 3 bites of the cherry is damning for everybody involved. I mean, there is no more emotional case than the death in custody of an individual, the death in custody of a black man, the shooting of a black man. There's nothing more emotional than that. It is not served well by a system that doesn't appear to deliver justice for anybody involved in it, including that officer.
Neil Basu, many thanks. Neil's new book, Turmoil, 30 Years of Policing, Politics and Prejudice, is out now. Thank you, mate. It's 12:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Up next, Lucy Easthope, the International Advisor on Disaster Recovery, bringing lessons on how those of us who are never going to go near an international disaster in our lives, touch wood, might bring some of her skills to bear upon our own lives.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:51 is the time. I wonder whether this description actually fits both my guests this hour, but I am in awe of the woman who's just walked into the studio. And when I tell you that when tragedies like the 9/11 atrocity, the Boxing Day tsunami, the London Underground bombings, Grenfell Tower, Salisbury poisoning, and latterly the Southport stabbings, which have occurred since I last saw Lucy Easthope, these are all events to which people like Lucy lead the response. And the rest of us, in the absence of books like her bestseller, When the Dust Settles, know next to nothing about it. The new book, it seems like such an obvious and brilliant idea that you have chosen to bring the lessons you've learned from responding to massive crises in the world to helping people respond to massive crises in their own life.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That was exactly the point of it, really. That was exactly what I wanted to do.
Because you realised that your response to personal crisis was dramatically different to your response to national crisis.
Yeah, that was absolutely spot on what was happening. And when people were asking me questions, more and more I realised that they were quite taken aback by some of the things that myself and other emergency planners did. And I felt like there was something in that. Well, that we perhaps felt very comfortable talking about things in advance. You know, the idea that knowledge dispels fear, that we were very comfortable listing all the things that could go wrong. And that has a really good effect on things like your startle factor. So we as a tribe, I think, are quite protective of ourselves, and it just felt like that was something that the world was missing out on. And more I was sort of trialing this out on family and friends, and it was working.
So how can we be better prepared for trauma?
Well, this was about being ready for what's coming over the hill. And also emergency planners live in a completely different world to the rest of, in that we make a big long list of all the risks that are going on around us. We're ready for when they respond. We go to the response. And then I'm not a first responder. I'm the last responder. So I'm there afterwards. And this gives you these insights into thinking about things differently. So, for example, taking with you the kind of things that you might need if you're kept away from being able to get home. Having, if you're lucky enough to have a home, having things at home to be ready for things like a power cut. And I think 2025 people seem more willing to talk with me about these things. A few years ago, people said that was doom mongering and it was the government's responsibility to keep them safe. But this year feels like people are ready for the conversation.
Because things feel less permanent and more fragile than they have done in previous times. COVID shook our confidence a lot, and politics, possibly more so on the other side of the Atlantic, have reminded us that nothing is permanent. And so you pick up on that, people feeling a little less plugged into security.
And we were sort of ready for that. You know, emergency planners are several seasons ahead, and you don't really have something as foundation shaking as the pandemic without a series of consequences. You've got a lot of confrontational politics at the moment, which are bringing all these issues to the fore. And people are looking outside and realising something's not quite right, and then being told inside that they must be anxious. That's why they're worrying about it. And we don't think like that at all as emergency planners. We think, you know, being a little readier is really good for the soul.
Why is hopium such a dangerous drug?
So hopium, I'm waiting to see if that chapter gets me cancelled, but hopium is about too much hope. Not the good hope, not the rebellious warrior hope, not the hope that gets things done, but hopium that leads to denial, hopium that stops us making difficult choices. And that's one of the things that really, you know, we see it in big disasters, and then we see it so often in family situations. So not making plans for perhaps an ill family member or an ageing family member. We kind of live on, we'll keep our fingers crossed. So hopium was something that I wanted to articulate as holding us back from making decisions that help us survive.
Okay, so you can't prepare for the worst if you keep telling yourself the worst isn't going to happen.
Absolutely.
I quite like that, actually. It's
I wrote it with you in mind.
Don't be ridiculous. The worst always happens in my world. And there are, quite straightforward pieces of advice as well, some of which people have historically scoffed at, but breathing exercises can be completely life-changing.
When we're in a constant state, as we are at the moment, of wondering what's going on all around us, we breathe very shallow breaths, short, shallow breaths, and we don't oxygenate properly. So just really basic things like learning how to breathe more deeply, closing the eyes. We're often in a very heightened state with our eyes very open, getting outside, physically getting away from screens. They're absolutely sensible pieces of advice, but what we find is we don't follow them. So as emergency planners, we're constantly reinforcing themselves amongst ourselves. And it, again, just felt important to write some of that down.
There's a lot about bereavement in the book as well, which is probably the most commonly experienced trauma, isn't it?
It's something we will all experience, and it's something we'll all help other people experience. And one of the things about, you and I have talked before, there was the acute stage of the pandemic where we saw specific death toll, and then there was always going to be a great deal more death and grieving and bereavement in the years to come. And what was very hard was, 2 years ago that came home, and that included my dad. So it felt like the right time to talk about, do these lessons work in the family, in the home? And I've never been more grateful for my work because it's got me through.
What is the lasagna phase?
So the lasagna phase of bereavement is when the food starts to arrive, lots of gifts from family. And in the book, I introduce the disaster recovery graph, the honeymoon phase after an immediate incident where people rush in with their support. And you've entered it as a bereaved person if the lasagnas start to arrive. But it's very, very brief, fragile. It's actually getting shorter, 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks at best. Then you hit the slump. And that's really important for people to know about, because in tragedy and in disaster, what I'm always fighting against is politicians and governments who think each week will get better. It'll get better after the first anniversary. And, the dirty secret is the second year's harder, the third year's worse still. So you have to plan for that. And again, that made a different set of advice for family members than other types of grief advice.
I think we've hopefully answered the question of who would benefit from this book in the course of this conversation, because the answer is everybody, and indeed anybody. The subheading of it, Life-Changing Lessons for Coping with Crisis, narrows your target audience down to any human being who might ever face a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, I love humans, so it was
pretty good
for
market,
everyone.
isn't it?
Yeah, that was the ultimate dream. Everyone, regardless of politics or position, everyone.
Come What May by Lucy Easthope is out now, and don't be put off by the weirdo on the front cover who describes her as an amazing woman. No one pays the blindest bits of attention to anything he ever says. It is coming up to 1 o'clock. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the brand new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinions. Put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a dizzying range of podcasts, including Lucy's appearance on Full Disclosure. Download it now, the all-new official LBC app. It's free and it's in your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.